Storm clouds rolled across the sky above Casterly Rock, painting the battlements in a bleak gray light. Below, the sea churned, sending white-crested waves crashing against sheer cliffs. Within the rock's stony halls, lit by sparse torches, Lord Tywin Lannister stood by a narrow window, staring out over his domain. His face was a rigid mask of anger barely contained, and behind him, Jaime Lannister paced restlessly, golden hair disheveled from days of riding and sleepless nights. "So," Tywin said in a voice like cold iron, "we have confirmation now that the rumors of Robert Baratheon's survival are true. He rules from King's Landing, unchallenged. That Red Witch of Stannis's must have used her sorceries to snatch him from death's jaws." He turned abruptly. "And you confirm the boy Joffrey remains in chains?" Jaime clenched his jaw, golden hand flexing at his side. Though in this particular retelling, he still possessed both hands, for his earlier conflict that might have cost him a limb had never happened. Yet a phantom tension rippled there all the same, the memory of a near miss in battle. "Yes," he said through gritted teeth. "Cersei and Joffrey languish in the Red Keep's dungeons. The guards loyal to us are either dead or scattered. The city watch is wholly in Baratheon hands, with Ned Stark holding the post of hand. The Tyrells have poured into King's Landing to form an alliance, and Stannis has arrived with a fleet. The entire realm stands with Robert, or at least they pretend to." Tywin's nostrils flared in quiet fury. "And I suppose you've come hoping we can remedy this humiliation. My daughter and my grandson thrown into cells like common criminals, while Robert proclaims them traitors in front of the entire realm." He paused, eyes narrowing. "Have you heard any mention of a trial date? Or the faintest hint of mercy?" Jaime's face hardened. "They talk of treason, incest, the false parentage of Joffrey and his siblings. Robert's crowing that the Lannister hold on the throne was a lie from the start. The rumor is that the next step will be a formal trial. If Joffrey is found guilty, the penalty could be death. Cersei might fare no better." A hush fell. Rain began to lash the windows, hissing against the glass. Tywin inhaled slowly, controlling his anger. Robert wants a war, or else he would not hold them so publicly. But as things stand, the realm stands behind him. The old notion of the roaring lion has lost its fear if half our sworn banners waver at the rumor that Robert rose from the grave. Jaime's hand twitched near his sword hilt. "We can still muster near 30,000 men if we gather every banner from Lannisport to the Golden Tooth. More if we coerce a few fence-sitters. But with the Tyrells supporting Robert, and the Baratheon brothers seemingly united, we're outnumbered. A direct march on King's Landing would be suicidal. They know that. It's why they openly flaunt Joffrey's captivity." Tywin's silence was a testament to his seething frustration. Never before had House Lannister been so cornered. Years of careful manipulation had elevated Cersei to queen and made Joffrey king. Now that entire edifice was undone. Tywin turned from the window, cool green eyes fixing on Jaime. "We will not simply roll over. If Robert wants to parade his second life before the realm, let us see how many men die to protect his shining legend. The Lannisters do not yield. We will regroup at the Golden Tooth, draw the River Lords out, and force a quick, decisive blow. If we can capture Edmure Tully or cut off the Tyrell supply lines, we might force Robert to terms." Jaime nodded, though a muscle in his cheek tightened. "We ride at dawn, then?" Tywin considered, scanning the gloom of the corridor beyond his chamber door. "Yes, you'll take command of the vanguard. I will bring the main army behind you. We must preserve the aura of unstoppable might. Only then can we hope to unnerve the Tullys or the Tyrells." He paused. "And if an opportunity arises to retake Harrenhal or draw out Robert's forces, we seize it." Jaime's lips curled. "I want them all to pay for this. Robert, Ned Stark, the Tyrells. Everyone who put Joffrey and Cersei in chains. They'll beg for mercy." Tywin nodded once, his face grim. "Then be sure not to let your fury blind you. We fight for the future of House Lannister." Thunder rumbled in the distance, as if echoing their resolve. Jaime strode from the room, cloak swirling behind him. Tywin lingered by the window watching the storm. In his mind's eye, He envisioned the entire realm trembling as the lion roused itself for war. Magic or no magic, resurrection or not, Robert Baratheon would learn that a cornered beast could be more deadly than any champion of the gods. Far to the east, in King's Landing, the sun broke through late morning clouds. The city smelled of recent rain, the stones glistening underfoot as courtiers and guards bustled about the Red Keep. In a small courtyard bright with climbing roses, King Robert Baratheon stood with Margaery Tyrell, exchanging quiet words. The rest of the castle's denizens kept their distance, granting the pair a modicum of privacy. Nearby, a couple of gold-cloaked guards stood at the arches, watchful but discreet. Margaery had asked for a moment alone with the king. She wore a gown of pale green that caught the glow of the morning sun, her brown hair artfully arranged, her demeanor poised. Robert found himself struck by her calm, almost regal presence. For all of Margaery's youth, she possessed a courtly grace that reminded him of days long past. "Your Grace," she began with a respectful incline of her head. "My father would have me press you for a formal betrothal, but I know your burdens weigh heavily right now. The war councils, the tension in the realm. I don't wish to be an added burden." There was a warmth in her voice that felt genuine. Whether or not it masked her father's ambitions, Robert could not fully tell. He managed a faint grin. "You speak well, Lady Margaery. I'm grateful for your understanding. I've no desire to repeat my mistakes of the past, rushing into a marriage that may lead to more strife. But I cannot deny the benefits of an alliance with your house." His voice dropped a note, sorrow tugging at its edges. "Even so, I have enemies on all sides. Tywin Lannister musters in the west. The Vale is uncertain. I can't promise the realm a lavish wedding feast if we march to war tomorrow." She took a step closer, her eyes sincere. "I've heard the talk of an impending campaign against House Lannister. My father and brother, Loras, are anxious to prove Highgarden's loyalty to you. The small folk in the Reach have always eaten well under Tyrell rule, and my father believes they would support a king who assures them continued prosperity. A union between us could settle many doubts." Robert nodded slowly. "You're right, could. But let me be blunt. My prior marriage ended in betrayal. Joffrey was no son of mine, and that fiasco nearly destroyed the realm. I won't be deceived again." His gaze flicked to her face, searching. "If you are to be queen, if I need honesty, loyalty. No secret agendas, no cat and mouse games." Margaery's eyes remained steady. "I understand, Your Grace. All I can offer is my word. I want what's best for the kingdom and for my family. If standing by you can bring stability, then I shall do so wholeheartedly." She paused, a softness crossing her features. "I've seen the starving outside these walls, the orphans of war. The crown can do so much good if it's stable and responsible. Let me help you achieve that, whether by marriage or by any means you see fit." Surprise flickered across Robert's face. He was used to cunning courtiers who draped their ambition in pleasantries, but Margaery's earnestness felt different. Even if some part of it was performance, it was a performance that soothed him. "Very well," he said, voice gentler. "We'll move forward one step at a time. If the war can be averted or swiftly won, then we'll consider an official betrothal." She inclined her head. "Thank you, Your Grace." An almost hesitant smile curved her lips. "And, for what it's worth, I believe the realm will rally around you. Rumors of your resurrection have spread, and most see it as a sign. Perhaps the gods truly favor you." Robert let out a low chuckle. Or it could be the devilry of that red woman. Either way, I intend to use this second chance to do better than I did before." She smiled, stepping back with a small curtsy. "I'm glad, my king." They parted ways then, Margaery gliding across the courtyard to rejoin her retinue while Robert lingered, thoughtful. He was no naive lad. He knew that Margaery, or rather House Tyrell as a whole, had designs on the throne's future. But in that moment, he found he did not entirely mind. If it brought more swords and more stability to the realm, so be it. The boyish part of him even felt a spark of interest in this poised young woman who seemed so different from Cersei. Before he could dwell on such thoughts for long, a voice roused him from behind. "Your Grace," said Ned Stark quietly, appearing under the courtyard arch. "Might I have a word?" Robert turned, seeing the lines of concern etched in Ned's brow. "Of course," he rumbled, beckoning Ned closer. "What is it?" "Not here," Ned murmured. "Let's walk. It's sensitive." Robert nodded, and they strode through a maze of corridors that led them deeper into the castle, eventually emerging in a secluded terrace. Ser Barristan Selmy followed at a respectful distance, though Ned signaled for him to remain by the entrance. The terrace overlooked the Blackwater, the sun reflecting off the water in sparkling shards. "I was out in the city this morning," Ned began softly. "I visited Tobo Mott's forge, checking on the armorers who will supply some of our men. While there, I encountered a young man, tall, broad in the shoulders, with dark hair and bright blue eyes. When I looked at him, I felt as though I were staring at a young you. His name is Gendry." Robert's face tensed. "Another of my bastards, then. I recall that Mott had one of my get as an apprentice. Did you speak with him?" Ned nodded, looking uneasy. "Yes, but, Robert, there's more. The boy had a medallion shaped like a stag, given to him when he was small. He said it belonged to his mother. He remembered that she died under strange circumstances, but that before the end, she showed him a piece of parchment. A marriage contract, signed and sealed by your own hand." Robert's breath hissed out, half in disbelief, half in anger. "What are you saying, Ned?" "I'm saying Gendry might not be a bastard after all," Ned said, voice hushed. "He might be your legitimate son." I pressed him, and he showed me the half-burned remains of a contract hidden in a wooden box. "The words are faint, but they mention your name, and that the mother, a lesser noble from the Stormlands, was wed to you in secret before the rebellion truly took shape. Her name was Slice of House. Well, the name is hard to read. Something like House of the Wendwater region. The union was never publicly recognized, but the seal and your signature, it appears real." Robert's heart pounded. He remembered the rebellion's earliest days, traveling the Stormlands to gather supporters. Memories blurred by war, adrenaline, and yes, occasional dalliances. Could he have wed some minor noble's daughter in a ceremony half lost to time? This is madness. That would make Gendry a true-born heir. Ned's face was grave. It would. Robert stared out over the water, the weight of it crashing down upon him. "I'd heard rumors that I took up with a Stormland girl before the battles near Summerhall, but a marriage? If we did wed, it must have been in the heat of a vow to secure some local support. Maybe I was young, foolish, desperate for allies. Then we parted ways, or she disappeared, or... Gods, Ned." He let out a shaky breath. "And if the parchment is real, Joffrey and the rest are definitely no heirs of mine. But this Gendry, he might well be." Ned laid a hand gently on Robert's arm. "I tested the paper as best I could. It's old. The seal is the crown stag, precisely the same as from your early personal signet. I recognized it from the time we marched together. If someone forged it, they'd have to be intimately familiar with the details of your signet from that era. And Gendry's mother apparently insisted on her deathbed that he keep it safe. She must have believed it was legitimate." Robert's mind spun. He felt a swirl of emotions. Shock, confusion, even a flicker of anger that he had never known. "You spoke to the boy. Did you tell him?" "I told him only that he bore Baratheon blood. I said you would want to meet him. He doesn't know about the contract's significance. Not fully. He was suspicious enough when I pressed him." Robert clenched and unclenched his fists. "Then we must speak with him. Now." Ned nodded. "He's waiting in the Tower of the Hand. I brought him inside the castle discreetly, told him it was a matter of forging some special armor. He's anxious, but he came willingly." Robert set his jaw. "Let's go." They found Gendry in a small side chamber near Ned's private offices. The young man stood awkwardly in a corner, running a hand through his thick black hair. He wore a simple leather jerkin dusted with metal filings, and he looked every inch a blacksmith's apprentice. Yet his features bore the strong lines of House Baratheon, from his broad brow to the set of his jaw. The moment Robert entered, Gendry stiffened. His bright blue eyes flicked from Ned to the imposing king. "Your Grace," he said, bowing stiffly. Lord Stark said, "I'm not sure why I'm here." Robert studied the youth, heart pounding with recognition and an odd fatherly ache he'd never felt. "You look very much like me as a lad. You know your father was Robert Baratheon, yes?" Gendry nodded, a shadow of resentment crossing his face. "I suspected. People always told me I had the look of him. But you never came for me." Robert swallowed, uncertain how to respond. The boy's directness stung. "I didn't know about you, or not fully. Bastards aren't exactly welcomed at court. I was a fool." He glanced at Ned, who quietly urged him on. "But there's a possibility that you're not a bastard after all." Gendry frowned, confused. "I've been told all my life that I was born on the wrong side of the sheets. My mother, she died when I was little, but she said my father was a lord or a king. She never told me more except to keep the medallion. Then Lord Stark started asking me about some old paper." Ned stepped forward. "If your mother's name was Slice, and if this is truly her signature as well, it appears she and Robert wed during the war. A union never dissolved. That might make you the king's trueborn son." Gendry blinked, face going pale. That can't be right. Nobody's ever said." Robert let out a rough exhale. "I barely remember. Too many battles, too much chaos. But I see my own blood in you, boy. And if Ned's right, your mother had my name and seal. That means you might be my heir." Silence thickened, broken only by Gendry's shaky breathing. He looked between the king and the hand, searching for signs of a cruel joke. "I'm just a blacksmith's apprentice. I can't be a prince." Ned's voice was gentle. "If the proof is genuine, you already are, in a sense. Though we have more questions than answers." He glanced at Robert. "We should examine the contract thoroughly. Perhaps speak with older Stormlands lords who might recall a hush-hush union. But from all signs, it appears real." Gendry's eyes shone with confusion, even a bit of fear. "Why now? Why do you want me now?" Robert felt a pang. He approached Gendry slowly, placing a large hand on the boy's shoulder. Gendry flinched but did not draw back. "Because I was blind," Robert said quietly. "But the realm changes day by day. My so-called children with Cersei were all false. Betrayals swirl everywhere. If you are truly my son, I want you safe, recognized." Gendry swallowed. "And if I'm not?" Robert shot a look at Ned. "We'll confirm it. Until then, you will stay here under my protection. You won't go back to that forge unless you wish to. Do you hear? No one can force you out." Gendry seemed overwhelmed but nodded. "All right, Your Grace." Robert mustered the faintest fatherly smile. "We'll figure it out." Ned led Gendry out then, intending to settle him quietly in a modest chamber near the Tower of the Hand. Once they were gone, Robert sank into a chair, head in his hands. The revelations battered his composure. A secret marriage, a living son who might be the realm's rightful heir, and all of it emerging in the midst of an impending war. Part of him felt an unexpected surge of pride. He had a real son to carry on House Baratheon. Another part felt the old guilt, the weight of having abandoned that mother to an unknown fate. He sat there for a long while, letting the swirl subside. Rumors often ran wild in King's Landing, but Ned Stark took great pains to keep the discovery of Gendry quiet. He trusted only a handful of men, Ser Barristan, a few loyal stewards, and some old Stormland knights who might recall the earliest days of the rebellion. By cross-referencing their memories, Ned learned that Robert indeed had tarried in the Wendwater region, forging alliances among minor houses. One of those alliances involved House Celtigar's lesser branches, or so it seemed. The details were murky, for that entire era was overshadowed by the battles that soon followed. Robert, meanwhile, consulted with the priests at the Great September of Baelor, seeking any archived marriage records from that chaotic period. The Septons found little. War had destroyed many records, and the faith scribes had been scattered. But the few scraps that survived hinted that a discreet union might have been performed by a wandering Septon who died soon after. Still, none of it was conclusive. In hushed corridors, Ned, Robert, and a select few pored over the half-burned parchment. The royal seal matched precisely with Robert's ancient personal signet, used only in the earliest rebellion days. The contracting party, Slice of the Wendwater, was named. The date was near the start of the campaign, before the fall of Summerhall. The final lines were charred, but one passage read, "Here do Robert of House Baratheon and Slice of House vow, in the sight of the Seven, to wed and unite their families. Any child begotten of this union is declared legitimate." And at the bottom, the flourish of Robert's name. All battered by time and flame, but still decipherable enough to raise the possibility that Gendry was, in fact, a legitimate heir. During those days, Gendry roamed the Red Keep in a daze, half wanting to flee. He was not used to courtiers bowing or addressing him as M-Lord. Ned, sensing the boy's discomfort, assigned him a kindly steward named Wilton to guide him. Gendry spent hours in the armory, occasionally helping shape new blades. When the formalities got too stifling, he stole moments to hammer hot iron, letting the clang keep him grounded. But word has a habit of seeping through the cracks in King's Landing. A whisper here, a rumor there. The king has found another son. Could it be a secret prince? The black-haired youth in the castle stables is said to have the Baratheon look. Some thought it mere gossip, akin to the dozens of other rumors swirling about Robert's resurrection. Heirs swore they had seen a new Baratheon banner hung in the boys' corridor. Marjorie Tyrell, for one, found the speculation intriguing. She discreetly asked Ned about it one afternoon, her tone curious rather than prying. Ned, reluctant to lie but equally reluctant to reveal too much, simply said that the king was investigating the parentage of a young man who might bear Baratheon blood. "I cannot say more," Ned added gently. "Forgive me, my lady." Marjorie nodded, her expression thoughtful. Perhaps she realized that if Robert had a legitimate heir, any prospective marriage alliance might shift in nature. But she merely smiled and let the matter drop. It was in the midst of these delicate investigations that war rumors intensified. Ravens flew to King's Landing bearing dire news. Tywin Lannister and Jaime Lannister had left Casterly Rock with a massive host, marching east across the Westerlands. Scouts reported that they meant to cross the Red Fork, harry the Riverlands, and force a battle near Riverrun. Edmure Tully scrambled to muster his bannermen, but if the Lannisters struck swiftly, they might crush key strongholds before the main Royal Reach Stormlands alliance could intervene. King Robert convened another war council. This time, Stannis Baratheon stood near the table with an impassive scowl. Renly Baratheon lurked in a corner, and Mace Tyrell, puffy-faced with worry, hovered over maps. Marjorie was not present, but Loras Tyrell stood behind his father, jaw set in readiness. Ned Stark and Ser Barristan flanked the king as usual. A handful of Crownlands and Stormlands lords waited at the periphery. Robert leaned forward, his broad hands on the map. "The Lannisters are on the move. We cannot wait for them to sack the Riverlands and then march on King's Landing. We must muster our main army at Rosby, then push west. The Tyrell forces, led by Loras and Lord Mathis Rowan, can join us along the King's Road. From there, we press forward and meet Tywin head-on." Renly frowned. "Would it not be wiser to let Edmure Tully delay them at Riverrun? Then we swoop in behind the Lannisters?" A pincer movement. Stannis shook his head. "Too risky. If Tully is overwhelmed quickly, Tywin could fortify the Riverlands, forcing us to cross the Blackwater with fewer strategic points. We'd lose momentum." Mace Tyrell cleared his throat. "Highgarden stands ready. I can send more men to protect the supply lines. Loras can lead our cavalry in a flanking maneuver." He glanced at Robert. "We're eager to prove ourselves, Your Grace." Robert's eyes flicked to Ned. "Your thoughts?" Ned spoke steadily. "A united host is stronger. We We cannot rely on Tully alone. If we gather our banners now, we can ride for the Riverlands and reinforce Edmure before the Lannisters break his defenses. Time is of the essence. Robert nodded curtly. Then let us do it. We ride within the week. Summon all men who can bear arms. Mace, have your supply wagons set to depart with ours. Stannis, keep half your fleet to guard King's Landing from the sea in case of an Ironborn raid or other threat. Take the rest up the coast to harry any Lannister supply ships out of Lannisport. He inhaled, the old warrior's thrill and dread mingling in his chest. We will crush Tywin's arrogance once and for all. After the council dispersed, Ned lingered with Robert by the painted table, an old relic that had been brought temporarily from Dragonstone for planning. What about Gendry? Ned asked quietly. If we march to war, do you plan to tell the realm about him? Robert's expression hardened. Not yet. Let me see how this battle goes. If I fall again, all talk of my heir is moot, and the boy is untrained in politics. I won't thrust him before the realm only to see him drowned in conspiracies. Ned nodded. He might do well forging arms, but I doubt he's ready to wear the Baratheon banner in battle. Robert clenched a fist. Still, a part of me wants him close. He's my blood. I can't deny I feel it. But the Lannisters, if they learn he is truly legitimate, might target him. One more reason to keep it secret for now. Ned agreed gravely. Then we leave a loyal guard in the Red Keep. Perhaps keep Gendry under watch in the Tower of the Hand, or even Storm's End if the fighting grows too near the capital. Storm's End might be safer, Robert murmured. But let's hold that decision until we have to leave. For now, we keep him here. They parted ways, each man carrying the burdens of a kingdom teetering on the brink. Jaime Lannister stood atop a rise overlooking the rolling plains of the Riverlands. The wind whipped through his golden hair, carrying the scent of wet earth and distant smoke. Below, an endless sea of tents stretched across the grass. The Lannister host, tens of thousands strong, banners of crimson and gold rippling under the sky. Men sharpened swords, checked horse tack, or joked nervously about the battles to come. Jaime's mood was anything but light. Days of forced marches had left him tired, but the gnawing rage fueled him. Up ahead lay the red fork of the Trident, and beyond it, Riverrun, Edmure Tully's seat, the logical first target. If they took Riverrun swiftly, it would strike fear into the Riverlords and hamper any rescue attempt by the Baratheons or Tyrells. He turned as Tywin approached on horseback, flanked by a retinue of bannermen and guards. Tywin dismounted, scanning the horizon with the calculating glare that had made him feared across Westeros. Riverrun scouts have spotted us by now, Tywin said. We'll cross by the shallow fords at first light, take up positions around the stronghold, and starve them out if they do not yield. Any news from our outriders? Jaime shook his head. They saw riders wearing Tully colors retreat inside Riverrun. No sign of the main Baratheon forces yet. Our guess is they're mustering east of the Blackwater. We have time for a quick strike. Tywin's mouth compressed. Time enough if we do not bungle it. I want you to lead the van and ensure the Tully outriders can't harass our engineers. We'll need to build siege lines. Jaime's pulse thrummed. A siege, or perhaps a pitched battle if Edmure Tully dared to meet them. The more violent the better, so far as Jaime was concerned. He yearned to spill blood after the humiliation inflicted on Cersei and Joffrey. As you command. I'll ride out at dawn. Tywin gave a short nod. We show no mercy to traitors. The Tullys aided Ned Stark, who led this entire fiasco. Remember that. Jaime's grin was savage. Oh, I remember. That night, the Lannister camp spread out across the farmland, torches winking like dull red eyes. The distant sound of hammered stakes and the low murmur of thousands of voices filled the air. Jaime lay in his tent, armor polished and ready. He pictured King's Landing in flames, Robert Baratheon's smug face contorted in defeat, Ned Stark groveling for mercy. The thought brought him some grim satisfaction. Back in King's Landing, tension mounted with each day as the host gathered. Marjorie Tyrell joined her father in readying supplies and coordinating messages. Renly oversaw mustering of Stormland's men, while Stannis saw to the fleet. Robert prowled the Red Keep like a restless boar, impatient to strike at Tywin. Amid the bustle, Ned found a moment to visit Gendry in the Tower of the Hand. He knocked on a side door, stepping into a modest chamber where the youth sat on a stool, polishing a breastplate. Gendry glanced up. "Lord Stark," he said quietly, setting aside his work. I heard talk the army's moving out soon." Ned inclined his head, taking note of how Gendry had grown more self-possessed since first arriving. "Yes, in a matter of days. The king intends to lead the host personally." Gendry's expression tightened with worry. "And me? Where do I go?" "You'll stay in the capital for now. Under guard, but not as a prisoner. Merely for your protection." Ned hesitated. "Gendry, I want you to know, Robert, the king truly does wish to acknowledge you if everything checks out. But with the war looming, he fears for your safety." Gendry frowned, though not from ingratitude. "I don't like hiding. If he's my father, let me fight. I can swing a hammer better than half these knights." Ned managed a faint smile. "I've seen your arms, impressive for one your age. But you lack training in mounted combat tactics. War is not only about swinging a weapon. And if you were captured by the Lannisters, it would be a disaster." The lad set his jaw. "I understand." He touched the stag medallion that hung from his neck, his mother's. I don't know what I'm supposed to do. I've always wanted a father, but I never pictured him as a king with half the realm at war." Ned's heart went out to him. "Believe me, Gendry, none of us chose these circumstances. Do what you do best for now, help with forging, keep your mind clear. When the war ends, there will be time to settle your place properly." Ned paused. "I want you to know, if Robert falls, I'll do my best to protect you." Gendry blinked, then nodded. "Thank you, my lord." Ned squeezed his shoulder, offering a measure of comfort before turning to go. In the corridor, he encountered Marjorie Tyrell, of all people, passing by with a retinue of maidservants carrying fresh linens. She paused, noticing the look on Ned's face. "Lord Stark," she said politely, "is everything all right?" He bowed his head briefly. "Yes, my lady. Merely seeing to the welfare of a new ward." He chose the phrase carefully. She regarded him for a moment, eyes alight with curiosity. "Ah, well, if there is anything House Tyrell can do, please let me know." Ned forced a neutral smile. "Your kindness is appreciated." She nodded and swept on, linen rustling around her. Ned watched her go, faintly uneasy. Marjorie was not the sort to be easily fooled. But, for now, Gendry's secret seemed safe enough. Days later, at dawn, the royal army began its march. The Red Keep's courtyards thundered with the hooves of war horses, the rattle of wagons, the bark of officers mustering their men. Robert, astride a massive destrier, wore plate and mail emblazoned with the crowned stag, his warhammer strapped to his saddle. He looked more like the young rebel who had once toppled the Targaryens than the half-sot king of recent years. Ned donned his own armor, the direwolf of House Stark on his surcoat, and rode at Robert's side. Behind them, Renly Baratheon, Mace Tyrell, Loras Tyrell, and hundreds of knights formed up. 10,000 men marched behind, with more to join along the road: Crownlanders, Reachmen, Stormlanders. Another 5,000 would defend the city, with Stannis' fleet guarding the coasts. On the castle ramparts, Gendry watched in silence as the procession wound through the gates. Ned had offered him a choice to come to the gatehouse, and the boy had accepted, though he stood well back from the official party. He saw Robert glance up once, only once, catching Gendry's eye. The king gave a brief, solemn nod. Gendry answered with a stiff nod in return. Then the army vanished into the morning haze, leaving the capital behind. Within days, the host advanced along the Rose Road, picking up more Tyrell bannermen. Garrisons at various keeps joined them, swelling their ranks. Word arrived that Edmure Tully held at Riverrun, preparing for a siege. Jaime Lannister's outriders prowled the countryside, burning small villages, but the main Lannister force had not yet assaulted the castle. Time was short. 2 weeks into the march, Robert's scouts reported that the Lannisters were crossing the Red Fork. The stage was set for a confrontation. Robert called a halt at a broad plain dotted with farms on the southwestern approach to Riverrun. There, the combined Baratheon-Tyrell army made camp. Over dusty fields, in the distance, the banners of House Lannister could be glimpsed near the shimmering line of the river. Ned, Robert, Renly, Loras, and the other commanders gathered by torchlight in a large pavilion, scanning rough-drawn maps. "We should force them to fight on our terms," Renly insisted, jabbing a spot on the map. "This farmland is open. If we meet them head-on, we can use the Tyrell cavalry to flank. The Lannisters rely on heavy infantry." Mace Tyrell, mopping sweat from his brow, nodded vigorously. "Yes, yes, cavalry. Loras can lead the vanguard. We'll smash their lines." Ned was more cautious. "We must be sure not to overextend. Tywin is cunning. He might feign a retreat and then counter with hidden reserves." Robert rumbled in agreement. "Tywin is no fool. We do have numbers in our favor, but if we get sloppy, we could lose half the army. I propose we anchor our left flank on the Red Fork and keep archers there to guard against any crossing. Our main force stands in the center. Loras's cavalry can harass the Lannister flanks, but only once we see where Tywin commits his best men." The plan took shape. The next dawn, it would be battle. Meanwhile, in the Red Keep, Gendry found the days passing in a surreal lull. He forged arrowheads, helped sharpen swords, but always his mind strayed to the father he barely knew. The city felt emptier with the king and so many knights gone. Rumors of the upcoming battle circulated wildly. Some insisted Tywin would crush Robert with cunning, others that Robert's righteous fury, bolstered by rumor of resurrection, made him invincible. Margaery Tyrell, interestingly enough, remained in King's Landing, presumably to reassure the small folk that House Tyrell had not abandoned the capital. She took it upon herself to distribute bread and stew to the needy, with the occasional show of generosity that echoed the stories of her charitable spirit in the Reach. Gendry saw her once in passing, as she supervised a wagon of grain being unloaded in Flea Bottom. The sight gave him pause. She was not what he expected of a high lady. He ducked his head, not wanting to be recognized, though he was not sure she would know who he was in the swirl of dusty peasants. She caught his eye momentarily, gave a polite nod, then turned back to her work. It was over in a blink, but Gendry felt a twinge of relief that, if she suspected his secret, she gave no sign. When he was not forging or fretting, Gendry found himself wandering the castle library. Books of heraldry, ancient rosters of knights. He read hungrily, searching for any mention of House Baratheon's earliest alliances in the Wendwater region. Most texts were incomplete or dusty. He gleaned a few references to lesser houses that had died out or been absorbed. The name Slice did appear in one fragment, apparently linked to a minor branch that had vanished after the rebellion. Gendry stared at the lines, heart pounding. Could that have been his mother? No one disturbed him in his reading. The castle was a hush of waiting, bracing for the news of war. That war, in fact, erupted the following dawn. On the wide fields near Riverrun, the Lannister banners clashed with the united host of King Robert and Mace Tyrell. The sky was overcast, the air thick with tension. At sunrise, horns blared from both sides. Men shouted, lines advanced. Robert himself rode at the center, warhammer in hand, Ned Stark at his flank, while Loras Tyrell led the cavalry on the right, and a mass of Stormlanders held the left by the river. Jaime Lannister commanded the Lannister vanguard, charging with reckless courage, lion banners whipping in the wind. Tywin held back with reserves, surveying the field like a hawk. The ground shook with the thunder of hooves, and the clang of steel on steel rose to the heavens. Ned Stark and Robert fought side by side, as they once had in the rebellion. Robert's hammer felled men like wheat, reminding all who saw him that he was a warrior first, a king second. The men who had once doubted his renewal found themselves cheering, inspired by his raw ferocity. Ned, calmer but no less lethal, directed pockets of infantry to fill gaps. Across the plain, Tywin unleashed crossbowmen to harass the Tyrell cavalry. Loras Tyrell led a bold flank assault, a flurry of green cloaks and flashing swords. Men fell screaming into the mud as horses toppled, squealing. Smoke and dust choked the air. Through it all, Jaime Lannister pressed forward, determined to break the Baratheon lines and kill Robert himself if he could. They nearly clashed, Jaime slicing through 2 Stormlands knights, his gilded armor spattered with blood, but a ring of loyal soldiers closed around the king. Jaime cursed, fighting to reach Robert, yet forced to retreat as an onslaught of pikes drove him back. Hours wore on. Bodies piled in the churned earth. The sun climbed higher, hidden behind clouds. Slowly, methodically, the Baratheon Tyrell host pushed the Lannisters back. At a crucial moment, Ned directed archers to rain arrows on Tywin's reserves, preventing them from flanking Robert's center. At the same time, Loras Tyrell swung around with fresh cavalry, crashing into the exposed lion ranks. Jaime fought like a demon to salvage the day, but Tywin, seeing the tide turn, signaled a retreat. Trumpets blared the fallback. The Lannister lines broke, many men fleeing in disarray toward the Red Fork. Robert's men gave pursuit, capturing hundreds. Jaime himself narrowly escaped, cursing vengeance as he fled. By dusk, the field was firmly in Baratheon hands. Bonfires crackled over a landscape of carnage. Riverrun was spared, and Edmure Tully rode out with fresh troops to greet the victorious king. Robert stood, soaked in sweat and gore, but unbowed. It was a decisive blow, though not the end of the war. Tywin and Jaime still had enough men to regroup. But the first major clash belonged to Robert Baratheon. Word of the victory traveled fast, borne by ravens and the triumphant songs of soldiers returning. In King's Landing, the small folk rejoiced, lighting candles and chanting praise for the resurrected king. Margaery Tyrell organized a modest celebration, distributing extra bread and salted fish. She stood at a makeshift dais in the city square, urging the people to remain hopeful. "The king has carried the day," she declared, "and soon he will return in glory." Gendry heard these announcements in the streets, blending with the crowds. He felt a strange surge of pride. The father he barely knew had won a great battle, had proven unstoppable. A whispered part of him wondered if that same blood coursed in his own veins. Perhaps one day he too would accomplish something worth singing about. The sense of relief in the capital was palpable, but overshadowed by the knowledge that the war was not finished. Tywin was too proud to yield easily. Within a fortnight, battered Lannister forces regrouped near the Gold Road, nursing their wounds. Robert pressed on, though carefully, to avoid an ambush. The campaign lengthened. For weeks, scattered skirmishes and smaller battles lit the countryside. Jaime led daring raids while Robert, Ned, and the Tyrells methodically advanced. Stannis' ships raided the coast near Lannisport, cutting off supplies, and rumor said Tywin was in a fury, venting at any who dared speak of surrender. Finally, after many more days of strain, King Robert returned to King's Landing with a portion of his host. He left Ned Stark with a strong force in the field to keep pressure on Tywin, but Robert believed it prudent to coordinate from the city for a time, restocking and reorganizing. The battered men stumbled through the gates to cheering crowds. Banners of the crowned stag flew from every rooftop. Margaery Tyrell, garbed in simple green linen, stood in the courtyard, welcoming the returning soldiers with water and thanks. Robert dismounted, greeted by Margaery's polite bow. "Your Grace," she said, "the city celebrates your victory. News of your feats has spread, and the realm takes heart." Robert gave a small, weary smile. A victory, but not the final one. He handed his reins to a waiting groom. "Still, it's good to see the city again." Margaery stepped aside gracefully as he strode into the Red Keep, where Gendry, uncertain of protocol, hovered. The lad looked at Robert with wide eyes. Indeed, the king cut an imposing figure, dust-streaked armor, bandaged forearm from a recent minor wound. For a moment, father and son locked gazes in the corridor. Gendry cleared his throat. I'm glad you're alive, Your Grace." Robert exhaled. "Thank you, lad. Have you been well?" Gendry nodded. "Lord Stark made sure I was safe. I stayed busy in the armory." An awkward pause. Robert lifted a hand, hesitated, then patted Gendry's shoulder. "Good. I'm glad." The words were stilted, uncertain, but Gendry's face lit with something akin to relief. Robert turned away, moving toward his chambers, as if the swirl of war weighed heavier in that moment than any paternal epiphany. That evening, Margaery Tyrell requested an audience with Robert in the Solar. She arrived in a subdued gown, her father absent. Robert, freshly bathed but still exhausted, gestured for her to sit. A single candle flickered, casting dancing shadows on the polished table. "You wish to speak?" he asked, voice bearing traces of fatigue. "Yes, Your Grace," she said softly. "I've heard whispers about the young man you brought into the castle, the blacksmith's apprentice. The city is rife with rumors that he might be your child." Robert's eyes tightened. "Rumors travel quickly." She pressed on delicately. "I only bring it up because I suspect those same rumors may spread beyond the capital. If House Lannister hears that you have a legitimate heir, they may view him as a direct threat. That knowledge could alter the course of the war. So I wonder, is it true?" Robert considered lying but sensed Margaery was too astute. "We've discovered evidence of a secret union from before my rebellion, a parchment with my seal. If that proves valid, Gendry is indeed my lawful son." She inhaled, a flicker of surprise crossing her features. "That changes matters greatly if widely known. The entire realm might rejoice that you have a recognized heir apart from the Lannister's brood. But it also might inspire fear among your enemies. Tywin is relentless. He might try to harm the boy to weaken your cause." Robert nodded grimly. "Hence the secrecy. Until I'm certain, I'll not shout it from the rooftops." Margaery's face lit with what looked like genuine compassion. "Have you thought about how Gendry feels? He must be overwhelmed, torn from his trade, labeled a possible prince. If you need assistance easing him into court life, I could lend help. My ladies know how to teach courtly manners without intimidation." Robert rubbed his eyes. "I've no head for such refinements right now. War devours my days, and I barely know how to speak to the boy. If you'd be willing to show him some courtesy, perhaps that might help." A small smile touched her lips. "I'd be glad to. I have younger siblings of my own, and I know how to manage uncertain hearts." Her gaze flicked to the candle flame. "Truly, Your Grace, if there is to be a future for this realm, we must build new ties, new trust. A stable succession is part of that." Robert studied her. He saw no guile in her eyes, though he reminded himself she was a Tyrell, trained in the arts of diplomacy. Even so, he appreciated her sincerity. "I thank you, my lady." She rose then, curtsied, and departed, leaving Robert alone with the candle. He wondered how different everything might have been if he'd known of Gendry from the start. If he had recognized a legitimate heir years ago, would Cersei's machinations have faltered, saving them from this crisis? But regrets weighed little now. He was a second-chance king, pledged not to repeat old mistakes. In the following days, Margaery made good on her offer. With Ned's approval, she invited Gendry to walk with her in the keep's outer gardens, accompanied by a few trustworthy guards. Gendry, at first awkward, soon found her easy to talk to. She asked about blacksmithing and forging, about the best types of steel. He spoke passionately of the craft, relaxing in the presence of her gentle curiosity. She suggested small lessons in reading and courtesy, acknowledging that if he indeed was the king's lawful son, he might need to navigate the lords at court. Gendry eyed her warily but did not refuse. He felt out of place, yet some corner of him longed to belong. Meanwhile, Ned quietly gathered more sworn testimony from old Stormland knights who confirmed that years ago, Robert had indeed spent time in the Windwater region forging alliances, and there was talk of a hush-hush wedding to secure a local fort's loyalty. That fort was soon destroyed by Targaryen forces. The bride vanished. The rumor was overshadowed by the larger rebellion. In short, all evidence pointed to the contract being real. Amid these developments, fresh tidings arrived from the warfront. Ned Stark had pressed forward, driving back scattered Lannister outriders. Jaime Lannister tried one more daring raid, only to be repulsed. Tywin retreated toward the borders of the Westerlands, fortifying near Ashmark. Letters from Ned spoke of a possible negotiation if Tywin felt cornered. But Tywin was proud, and any peace might be fragile. Late one afternoon, Robert and Ned sat in the King's Solar, reviewing a newly arrived missive from the Riverlands. Ser Edmure Tully reported that Riverrun had been spared serious damage, though farmland had been ravaged. The letter ended with a plea for decisive action. If we corner Tywin in the Westerlands, we might force him to release Cersei and Joffrey to your mercy. Robert let out a grunt. If Tywin bends the knee, we can end this war, but I suspect he'll do so only after a final stand. Another big battle might come. We need to be ready. Ned bowed his head. Agreed. He folded the parchment, setting it aside. In the meantime, the city grows restless with the war's length. Crops in the Crownlands suffer when men are away fighting. The Tyrell supplies help, but we can't lean on them forever. Robert sighed. Once the Lannisters are broken, the realm can breathe again. We'll see new harvests come. I have no illusions it'll be simple. But this time, Ned, I'll not let the kingdom rot in petty squabbles. Ned offered a tired smile. I believe you. Then his expression turned thoughtful. We should speak of Gendry. The more I learn, the more certain I am that the contract is genuine. The boy's mother died believing she was Robert Baratheon's lawful wife. She might well have been. By all the gods, that means Gendry is your heir. Robert's gut twisted with a mixture of apprehension and an odd sort of pride. It seems so. If so, the realm must know. Once the Lannisters are subdued, I'll announce it formally. Let them see the true Baratheon line. Let them see I have a worthy heir, one of my own blood who is not tainted by Lannister treachery. Ned's voice softened. Then you are prepared to name him Prince of the Seven Kingdoms? Robert stared at the table for a long moment, memories flooding him of the battles, the boar that killed him once, the illusions he'd lived under with Cersei. Yes, he said with quiet resolve. Yes, I will. I'll do it properly with a ceremony in the Great September, after the war is done. He'll need instruction, training in the ways of ruling. But I want the realm to see a new generation of Baratheon leadership. No more false princes. Ned nodded. We'll have to guard him well. The news could make him a target. Robert's eyes flashed. We'll keep him safe. I won't fail him the way I failed my other children. He paused, a heavy sorrow shadowing his face. If only I had known earlier, Ned. Ned set a hand on his friend's shoulder. Dwelling on the past changes nothing. Focus on the future. With Gendry, with the realm, with your second chance. Robert exhaled. You're right. We push on. Elsewhere in the Red Keep, Gendry hammered at a glowing piece of iron, sweat beading on his brow. The dull ring of metal was soothing, a reminder of simpler days. Marjorie Tyrell stood at a safe distance, occasionally asking a question about the forging process. She had requested a small demonstration in the keep's smithy, expressing curiosity about the craft. Gendry obliged, though he remained self-conscious in her presence. When he finished shaping the iron, he quenched it with a loud hiss. Marjorie clapped her hands softly. Thank you, Gendry. That was enlightening. You handle that hammer with remarkable ease. He wiped sweat from his brow, offering a wry shrug. I've been at the forge for years. It's all I know. She stepped closer, her tone friendly. You know more than you think. I've seen you in the library reading about heraldry, and you speak well enough when you choose. He looked away. Maybe, but if I am who they say, it's too big. I just want to keep forging. Hard to imagine wearing finery and sitting on a throne. Her gaze was sympathetic. Change can be daunting, especially for one in your position, but you might find new ways to do good for the realm. Perhaps one day you'll oversee the forging of swords for King's Landing, ensuring they are of the highest quality. Or feed the poor with your father's resources. There are many ways to serve. Gendry studied her, uncertain whether her words were just more courtly flattery. Yet something in her eyes suggested sincerity. I appreciate it, my lady. He tried a smile, though it felt awkward. I'll keep that in mind. She favored him with a graceful nod. I'll leave you to your work, then. Thank you, Gendry. As she departed, Gendry realized that though Marjorie was a highborn lady, she at least seemed willing to understand him. In another life, he might have brushed her off, resentful of all highborn. Now, he found himself grudgingly grateful for the small kindness. Several more weeks passed, with scattered skirmishes in the west. News arrived that Ned Stark had forced Tywin to retreat again, capturing key fords along the Tumblestone. Jaime Lannister was rumored to be raging at the repeated setbacks, his dream of vengeance fading as the Baratheon forces closed in. Some speculated that Tywin might soon sue for peace rather than see the Westerlands overrun. One afternoon, a raven arrived bearing an official Lannister seal. Robert, reading it in the presence of Ned, Marjorie, there on behalf of her father, Renly and Stannis, found that it was indeed a proposal for Parley. Tywin requested a negotiation of terms. Perhaps he wished to bargain for the release of Cersei and Joffrey. Robert let the parchment fall to the table. At last, the proud lion deigns to talk. He likely sees that another big defeat ends his hopes entirely. Stannis made a dismissive noise. He's probably stalling for time, trying to regroup. Still, we should hear him out. If it spares the realm further bloodshed, the cost might be worthwhile. Renly eyed the letter, lips curling in distaste. The Lannisters would demand a full pardon, a promise that we release Joffrey and Cersei. Will you show them mercy after all this? Robert's jaw tightened. They put Ned's head on the block, locked me away in my own bedchamber while I lay dying, and crowned a bastard as my heir. No, I'm not inclined to show mercy, but if we can end the war without more slaughter, maybe we can negotiate some settlement. Perhaps exile for Joffrey and Cersei, a heavy indemnity from Tywin. That might suffice. Ned rubbed his chin. We'll have to be careful. Tywin is cunning. But if the realm sees you accept a diplomatic solution, they may respect you all the more. Robert nodded. Then I'll consider meeting his envoys. If they come under flag of truce to Riverrun or some neutral ground, we'll see if they have genuine offers. Thus, the wheels were set in motion for a potential end to the war. The capital buzzed with cautious optimism. Marjorie continued her charitable works, Gendry continued forging arms, and Robert weighed the best course for the realm. Meanwhile, Ned arranged for fresh troops to rotate westward, ensuring Tywin could not exploit a lull to strike again. One crisp morning, Gendry was summoned to the Great Hall. Confused and tense, he arrived to find the king seated on the Iron Throne, with a small gathering of lords in attendance. Marjorie Tyrell was there, as was Renly, Ser Barristan, and a few others. Robert gestured for Gendry to approach. The young man walked forward, heart pounding at the sight of so many onlookers. Robert's voice echoed in the vaulted space. Gendry, step forward. He did so, swallowing hard. The king rose from the throne, descending its steps with measured strides. Ned Stark stood at Robert's side, face calm but resolute. I have summoned you, Robert said, because new evidence has come to light. He glanced at the assembled watchers. I keep my own counsel regarding the details, but I have reason to believe that Gendry is the son born of a lawful marriage I entered into before the rebellion was won. The events of that time were lost to chaos and tragedy. But now we have the contract and the testimony to confirm it. Gendry is not baseborn, but trueborn. A ripple of gasps coursed through the lords. Marjorie maintained a composed expression, though her eyes shone with interest. Renly looked taken aback, but not entirely surprised. Ser Barristan nodded gravely, as if he had suspected something of the sort. Gendry tried to speak, but no words came. His mind reeled. Robert continued, raising his voice to carry. I do not yet proclaim him as heir, but I declare him my recognized son, Gendry Baratheon. He shall be treated with the respect due one of my blood. Should this war end, I intend a formal ceremony in the Great September to seal his status." His gaze swept the crowd, daring anyone to object. "He will remain under my protection, and any threat to him is a threat to the crown itself." Ned stepped forward. "All hail Gendry Baratheon," recognized of the king's blood. Murmurs and scattered bows followed. Gendry's cheeks burned, feeling the weight of every stare. Robert placed a heavy hand on the lad's shoulder and murmured so only Gendry could hear, "I hope this is what you want, boy. I'll guide you as best I can." Gendry swallowed. "Thank you," he managed. Robert turned back to the watchers. "That is all. Spread word that any who question my will in this matter shall answer to me." At that dismissal, the small gathering dispersed. Marjorie offered Gendry a graceful curtsy, saying softly, "Congratulations, my lord," before leaving. Renly gave a half-smile, nodding in measured approval. Ned quietly squeezed Gendry's shoulder. The boy, or rather the newly minted lord, stood rigid, uncertain whether to flee or remain. Finally, Robert nudged him gently. "Go to the Tower of the Hand if you like, lad. This is enough spectacle for one day." Gendry bowed awkwardly and left, accompanied by Ser Barristan, who gave him a reassuring nod. For better or worse, he was no longer just a blacksmith's apprentice. He was Gendry Baratheon, recognized son of the king. Behind the scenes, the response to Robert's announcement was swift and varied. Many lords rejoiced that a legitimate Baratheon heir stood ready, ending the line of Lannister false princes. Others grew anxious, seeing potential conflicts with any prospective marriage to Marjorie Tyrell. Still others whispered that Gendry was unfit for princely duties. But none dared openly challenge the king, especially after his battlefield triumph. In the West, when Tywin Lannister received the news, he reportedly flew into a rage, hurling goblets and calling Robert a drunken whoremonger turned zealot. Jaime fumed as well, calling it a farce, though part of him realized the realm might welcome any stable line of succession that excluded Joffrey's tarnished claim. Peace talks lingered, with Tywin sending half-hearted envoys to gauge Robert's terms. Meanwhile, Jaime prowled the edges of the Westerlands with remnants of the Lannister host, too proud to yield but lacking the strength to mount a large-scale offensive. The realm hovered on the precipice. One final negotiation or battle might decide if House Lannister fell or found a face-saving compromise. In King's Landing, Gendry struggled to adapt. He spent hours in the courtyard, practicing sword forms with a royal arms master. Though he'd always swung a smith's hammer, the footwork and discipline of a knight's training were foreign. Day by day, he improved, surprising the master with his raw strength. Marjorie and her ladies offered him lessons in reading and writing beyond the basics. At first, he chafed under it, but he soon recognized that if he was to be a prince in truth, he needed to read ledgers, sign decrees, and navigate the labyrinth of courtiers. Robert, for his part, tried in small ways to bridge the gap. He'd invite Gendry to stand with him at court sessions, or to watch as he presided over petty disputes. Sometimes he'd ask about forging, or the aspects of Stormland's culture Gendry had gleaned from books. Awkward though it was, each day they found a small measure of familiarity. A bond formed, tentative yet growing. The presence of Marjorie Tyrell hovered like a question mark. She continued to treat Gendry kindly, but her father's repeated attempts to secure a betrothal with Robert had grown complicated. If Robert now had a recognized heir, some wondered if the king needed to marry at all. Others whispered that a new queen could strengthen Gendry's legitimacy by forging alliances. Marjorie, for her part, appeared unflustered, focusing on caring for the small folk. Yet speculation ran rampant. Late one night, Ned Stark entered Robert's solar bearing the latest letters from the front. Tywin's envoys had requested a formal parley, to be held near the Crossroads, with neutral parties present to witness. It seemed the old lion might be ready to negotiate an end to hostilities in exchange for the release of Cersei and Joffrey, or at least a more lenient sentence. Robert read the letters carefully, rubbing his chin. This is it, then. If we can come to terms, the war ends. If not, we might see one last battle. Ned nodded. We must tread carefully. Releasing Cersei and Joffrey could be a risk. They remain a symbol the Lannisters might rally around again. Robert's mouth set in a grim line. I will not let them roam free unpunished. Not after their treason and all the lies. Perhaps exile or else they face trial. We'll see if Tywin has the stomach to accept that. Ned recognized the hardness in Robert's eyes. He had no love left for Cersei or her children. When do you plan to ride out to the Parley? In a week's time, Robert said. I'll go with a strong escort, but I'll keep the main host in reserve. If Tywin tries trickery, we'll crush him. Ned gave a tight nod. Very well. I'll see to the preparations. Before leaving, he hesitated. Robert, about Gendry. Will you bring him along or leave him here? Robert considered. I'll leave him. It's too dangerous. If Tywin sees the boy, he might see an easy target. Gendry stays behind with a loyal guard. After we settle with Tywin, we'll proceed with Gendry's formal recognition. Ned bowed. Wise. The lad still needs time. Robert sighed. Don't we all? With that, Ned departed. Robert stared at the flickering candles, the weight of a realm on his shoulders. But for once, he felt a glimmer of hope that the bloodshed would not last forever. He had a second chance in life, an heir untainted by Lannister treachery, and possibly a path to end the war. If the gods, or Lawler, or whoever, truly had resurrected him for a purpose, perhaps it was to see Westeros united under a rightful Baratheon line. Perhaps, at last, the realm could find peace. A warm wind swept through King's Landing, stirring the banners along the Red Keep's battlements. It was nearing late afternoon, and the sun's light fell at a sharp angle, illuminating the city's dusty rooftops. In a courtyard ringed by high walls, Robert Baratheon waited with Ned Stark and Renly, each eyeing the stable yard where men prepared fresh horses. Soldiers bustled about, double-checking saddles and scabbards. The tension in the air had a particular edge. They were about to depart for the negotiated parley with Tywin Lannister, who had finally agreed to meet under a banner of truce. Robert wore a plainer set of armor than usual, scratched from the campaign but serviceable. At his side hung a sword. His warhammer, battered by months of fighting, was strapped to a packhorse. Ned's gray eyes scanned the yard, ensuring no last-minute sabotage lingered. Renly, leaning on a carved spear for support, wore a thoughtful frown. None of them fully trusted Tywin. They had fought the man's armies too long. We have to be ready for a trap, Robert murmured. But if we can avoid another bloodbath, so be it. I'd rather see the realm at peace again. Ned nodded. Agreed. We should end this war before the small folk suffer more. Keep your wits about you, though. Tywin might easily see a parley as a chance to rid himself of us. Renly exhaled. We'll bring a strong escort. He'll know if he tries treachery. We'll respond in kind. A hush fell as Gendry appeared on the far side of the courtyard. The young man approached hesitantly, wearing a leather jerkin trimmed in black and gold, the crowned stag newly embroidered on the breast. He looked every inch the blacksmith's apprentice who'd been thrust into a prince's role. Uneasy, but resolute. Around his neck hung the stag medallion that once belonged to his mother. Father, he said awkwardly. Lord Stark. Uncle Renly. He still struggled with the new forms of address, especially calling Robert father. But Robert had made it clear that was his right. Robert gestured him closer, a faint smile tugging at his beard. We ride soon, Gendry, but you will remain here. We can't have Tywin taking you hostage or slipping a dagger in your back. Gendry nodded, swallowing. I understand. His gaze flicked to Robert's gear. Be careful. Ned clapped the lad's shoulder. You keep watch over the city in our absence, and keep to your training with Ser Barristan. We need you in one piece. Gendry tried to hide a hint of worry that pulled at his expression. I will. Robert hesitated. A swirl of conflicting emotions filled him. Pride that he had a trueborn son, regret for the years lost, fear for what lay ahead. He placed a hand on Gendry's shoulder, matching Ned's gesture. When I return, we'll talk more. There's still the matter of a formal coronation for you as heir. But let's settle this war first. A flicker of astonishment crossed Gendry's face. He knew he had been publicly recognized, but to hear Robert speak of a future coronation, naming him crown prince in effect, made it feel more real than ever. "Yes, father," he managed. "Good lad," Robert said gruffly, then turned to Ned. "Let's be off." They set out from the courtyard, riding through the Red Keep's gates with a select force of knights, men-at-arms, and a handful of Tyrell bannermen, enough to show strength without provoking Tywin's paranoia. The main city gates opened, and the party wound its way out onto the King's Road, heading west to the Crossroads where the parley was to take place. Behind them, Gendry watched until they vanished from sight. He felt a hollow twist in his gut, but he forced himself to remain calm. If all went well, the war would soon be over, and with it, a future might open up for him as the recognized heir to the Iron Throne. He breathed deeply and turned back into the castle, an uncertain hope stirring in his chest. Melisandre stood at the top of the city walls, her red robes and flaming hair unmistakable even from a distance. The sun had begun to sink, casting the sky in bands of orange and pink, which flattered the crimson hue of her attire. She gazed upon the sprawling mass of King's Landing, her ruby necklace and bracelets catching the dying light and scattering it in subtle sparks. Over the past several weeks, red-robed priests of R'hllor had begun appearing more frequently in the city, as if summoned by some unseen beacon. Some arrived from Dragonstone with Stannis' blessing, others from across the Narrow Sea, having heard rumors that King Robert had been touched by R'hllor's power, resurrected, so the story said, by the Red Woman's incantations. The priests preached in street corners, reciting the virtues of the Lord of Light, urging worshippers to abandon the faith of the Seven. Their sermons spoke of a great darkness coming, a winter beyond mortal comprehension, and of R'hllor's chosen champion. And though Robert Baratheon himself did not kneel to their god, the rumor that he lived only because of R'hllor's intervention lent the priests a powerful mystique. King's Landing was always hungry for new wonders. Thousands of small folk, battered by war and hunger, found themselves drawn to the promise of deliverance by an elemental, fiery deity. The old septs still did their daily prayers, but a fervor was growing among the common folk, sparked by curiosity and desperation. Some carried tiny red ribbons on their wrists, a sign of favor from a red priest. Others lit small votive candles at dusk, seeking warmth in the long night. Melisandre inhaled the dusk air, feeling the swirl of new faith rising below. She could sense it as a ripple in a great cosmic tapestry, fresh sparks of belief igniting in the gloom. Her dark red lips curved in a slight smile. The city was kindling spiritually, and if the fire spread, soon thousands would call upon R'hllor, letting his flame burn away the old illusions. To her, it was all part of the vision the fires had shown her. A renewed Westeros, guided by the one true light. She turned, descending the steps to the courtyard within the walls, where two newly arrived red priests waited, men from Volantis, if the markings on their robes told true. They bowed to her as she approached. "Lady Melisandre," one said in accented common tongue, his face solemn. "We come as the Lord of Light commanded. The fires show a great change in these lands. The city stirs with possibility." She inclined her head, her voice lilting. "You are welcome here. The king is absent at the moment, negotiating an end to the war. But the time is ripe to bring R'hllor's truth to the people. The small folk yearn for guidance." The other priest, older, with a scrawling tattoo of flames across one forearm, looked around with curiosity. "We have heard that Robert Baratheon was saved from death by your hand. The rumor alone has made many kneel to the Red God." Melisandre's eyes glowed with satisfaction. "Yes, they see the miracle. They will soon see more if they open their hearts to the Lord of Light." A hush fell among them, thick with the unspoken sense of destiny. Nearby guards shot wary glances at the red priests but did not interfere. Too many had heard rumors that Melisandre possessed uncanny powers, sorcery that had undone a boar's mortal wound, that had compelled men to lay down arms. The wise guards gave her a wide berth. She escorted the priests deeper into the Red Keep, intending to show them a discreet corner of the castle that Robert had grudgingly permitted for her prayer gatherings. As she led them along, she mused that soon they might not need such secrecy. Every day, more altars to Lawler popped up in the city's alleys and squares, and more folk gathered at dusk to whisper prayers for light in the coming darkness. Gendry Baratheon was in the tower of the Hand's library, poring over a heavy tome. The sun's last light slanted through the tall windows, giving the chamber a golden haze. He was trying to read about House Wendwater, an extinct or nearly extinct line in the Stormlands that Ned believed might have been his mother's people. Most pages were genealogical listings or archaic alliances, the text thick with archaic phrasing. Gendry's reading skills had improved, thanks in part to Margaery Tyrell's encouragement, but it was still slow going. A soft knock sounded at the door. Gendry tensed, then called, "Come in." A steward peered inside. "Prince Gendry." The title still made Gendry uncomfortable. "Lady Margaery requests a word with you in the Western Garden, if you have a moment." Gendry ran a hand through his dark hair. "Of course. Thank you." He put aside the book and followed the steward through the winding passages of the Red Keep. The Western Garden was a modest courtyard overlooked by tall, slender windows. By the time he arrived, torches had been lit in wall sconces, casting dancing shadows among planters of flowers. Margaery Tyrell stood near a marble bench, wearing a blue gown with small gold accents. She turned at his approach, a friendly smile on her face. "Good evening, Gendry," she said with practiced warmth. "I hope I'm not intruding on your studies." He shifted his weight, feeling unaccustomed to being called prince or asked for an audience. "No, it's all right. I was just reading. Did you need something?" She gestured to the bench. "Shall we sit?" He nodded, settling beside her. She carried a small parchment in one hand, which she now placed on her lap. "I've been thinking about the small folks' plight," she said. "The war has caused many disruptions in trade and harvest. Your father, King Robert, once told me that when the war ends he wants to rebuild. But the city has needs right now. Would you be willing to help me coordinate a relief effort in Flea Bottom?" Gendry's eyes flickered with interest. Flea Bottom was where he had grown up, in those rancid alleys near the blacksmith's shop, though he rarely spoke of it. Well, what can I do? I'm no lord used to organizing shipments of grain." She smiled. "But you know Flea Bottom. You know what the people there need. If we can secure funds from the royal coffers, or from House Tyrell's own supply lines, we could bring more food and medicine to the poorest corners of the city. You could help ensure it reaches them properly, without corruption or meddling by unscrupulous guards." Gendry considered. He remembered the hungry nights he had endured, the hopelessness that pervaded the slums. "All right," he said carefully. "I'll try. I'm not sure I'm the best talker, but I know the streets. Maybe they'll trust me." Margaery's features lit with satisfaction. "Excellent. Thank you. I'll see that the Master of Coin, whoever is acting in that capacity right now, releases the necessary funds. We'll gather volunteers among the Red Priests, the City Watch, and some of my ladies, then coordinate deliveries at dawn." He arched a brow. "The Red Priests? Are they not too busy preaching?" She shook her head. "They are quite enthusiastic about doing visible acts of mercy, especially now that more people heed their words. Many claim the Lord of Light compels them to help the needy. It can only aid the cause of peace, I think." Gendry gave a non-committal shrug. The Red Priests unsettled him a bit. He'd heard the tales of how the Red Woman used strange powers, but if it helped feed the hungry, he couldn't argue. "All right, I'll do my part." Margaery touched his wrist in a gentle gesture of thanks. "This is a good step, Gendry. And, if I may say so, people will see you as a Baratheon who cares about them. That matters in these times." He nodded, feeling a flicker of warmth. Maybe his father's blood gave him the strength to do more than just forge steel. "Very well," he said quietly. "Let's do it." By the time night fully fell, the Red Keep was aglow with torchlight. Melisandre's new circle of Red Priests had taken up a habit of lighting tall braziers at dusk in certain courtyards, their flames dancing and casting arcs of light on the red and gold stone. Small groups of curious onlookers gathered, listening to the priestly chants and watching the tongues of fire lick the sky. Whispers of R'hllor and Lightbringer rippled through the throng. King Robert's old boar wound was still the story that galvanized them. Many believed R'hllor had directly intervened to keep the king alive for a great purpose. That same night, Gendry found himself out of the castle, following Margaery's plan. A half-dozen covered wagons creaked along the cobblestone roads leading to Flea Bottom, each carrying sacks of grain, turnips, salted fish, and ale. Torches flickered at the corners of the wagons, revealing the presence of both Tyrell men-at-arms and Red Priests. Gendry rode a borrowed horse at the head, feeling the stares of passers-by. He wore no crown or ornate cloak, but those who recognized him whispered, "It's the king's new son," or simply Prince Gendry. He tried to keep his gaze forward, ignoring the swirling murmurs. The city's gates loomed in the distance, but they veered left, descending a slope toward the cramped labyrinth of Flea Bottom. The reek of sewage and rotting waste assaulted his nostrils, stirring old memories. He'd grown up in these parts, hammered steel here, learned to fight. Now, returning in the guise of a royal benefactor felt surreal. In a wider alley where ragged children played in dirt, Margaery and her retinue dismounted. She wore plain traveling garb and carried a small lamp. The Tyrell men began organizing the wagons, handing out portioned sacks of food to a line of exhausted, hollow-eyed folk. Gendry dismounted as well, setting aside his horse. The Red Priests, robed in crimson, helped pass along the goods, murmuring about R'hllor's warmth. Some townsfolk looked wary, others openly grateful. "Form a line," shouted one of the Tyrell knights. "You'll all receive rations enough for 2 days." Gendry recognized some faces. A stooped old man once hammered nails in the same smithy yard. A pair of skinny children used to scurry around the forge, begging scraps. Now, seeing Gendry in semi-royal attire, they gaped. One child, a small girl with tangled hair, tugged on Gendry's sleeve. "Lord, are you truly the king's son?" He swallowed, then nodded. "Yes, that's what they say." He felt a pang seeing how thin she was. "Are you hungry?" She nodded, wide-eyed. He waved to one of the stewards, who handed her a small bundle of bread and salted fish. The girl clutched it to her chest, eyes shining. "Thank you," she whispered. "Thank you, Prince." A strange mix of pride and sadness swirled in his chest. He might have been that hungry child not so long ago, scrounging scraps. Now he had the power to help. If only the war truly ended and the city's resources improved. He forced a small smile. "Eat well, and share with your family." She bobbed her head and vanished into the crowd. Gendry turned away, finding Margaery watching him. She gave him an encouraging look, as if to say, "You're doing good here." He merely nodded in acknowledgement. This might not solve all ills, but it was a start. Late into the night, they distributed food. The Red Priests chanting drew throngs of small folk, some of whom accepted the brazier's warmth and the free bread as a sign that perhaps this new god was worth investigating. Gendry saw a few old septas peering warily from doorways, sensing their influence waning in the face of hungry bellies and open-handed R'hllor worshippers. The shift was subtle but potent. By the time the last cart was emptied, Gendry's muscles ached, but his spirit felt oddly lighter. He had done something real for the people. He understood now how Margaery managed to win hearts, by meeting needs directly with no condescension. If being heir to the Iron Throne meant more of this, then maybe it was a burden he could bear. Meanwhile, on the western frontier of the Crownlands, Robert and his entourage reached the designated place for the parley, a broad meadow near an ancient stone tower that sat beside a shallow stream. It was late morning, the sky crisp and blue. Flags of truce fluttered in the mild breeze. On one side, Robert, Ned, Renly, and a handful of loyal knights set up a small pavilion with the crowned stag displayed. Opposite them, across 100 paces of grass, Tywin Lannister's men raised the Golden Lion banner, though it drooped in the wind as if uncertain of its own status. For an hour, each side watched the other. Then Tywin emerged from his tent, accompanied by a retinue that included Ser Kevan Lannister and, to Robert's mild surprise, Jaime Lannister. Jaime wore plain steel, no gilded armor, but his face was set in a proud scowl. The Lannisters rode slowly across the meadow until they reached the halfway point, near a short table. Robert, Ned, and Renly did likewise. They dismounted in unison. Tension thrummed like a tight-strung bow. The last time Robert had stood face-to-face with Tywin, it was in the aftermath of Robert's rebellion, when Tywin offered the heads of dead Targaryen children to secure favor. Now, Tywin's face was older, lined with rage and frustration, but his bearing remained imperious. "Robert," Tywin said, not bowing. His cool green eyes flicked over Ned, then Renly. "I suppose we have matters to conclude." Robert folded his arms. "We do. You requested a parley. Let's see if you have anything worthwhile to say." Jaime's jaw tightened, and Ned gave him a stony look, recalling all the conflicts that had nearly killed them both. Kevin Lannister cleared his throat. "We come in good faith to negotiate an end to hostilities. House Lannister is prepared to lay down arms, provided certain conditions are met." Renly arched an eyebrow. "Conditions? You're in no position to name them, after 2 crushing defeats in the Riverlands and your retreat to the Westerlands." Jaime's glare sparked. "We remain strong enough to bleed you if you continue your vendetta. Tywin is prepared to fight to the bitter end unless a fair peace is offered. House Lannister doesn't roll over for any man." Robert's voice rumbled. "Get to the point, Tywin. Enough with the posturing." Tywin's lip curled slightly. "You hold my daughter, Cersei, and her son Joffrey. Release them unharmed. Drop all talk of executing them for treason or incest. Grant them leave to reside in Casterly Rock under house arrest. That is my first demand." Ned Stark's frown deepened. "They conspired to crown a false heir, plotted against the king, nearly executed me, and were complicit in the king's near-murder while he lay wounded. You expect them to go free?" "That is exactly what I expect," Tywin said coldly. "If you wish to end the war without 1,000 more corpses." Robert gritted his teeth, remembering the humiliations, the heartbreak, the betrayal. "And what do I gain?" Tywin inclined his head slightly, as if granting a concession. "We will acknowledge your kingship and the legitimacy of your new heir, this Gendry, of whom I hear so many rumors. House Lannister will swear fealty. Will pay a substantial indemnity in gold to replenish the crown's coffers. In return, you let my family live." Renly spoke up in a cutting tone. "And what of the Riverlands you and your armies ravaged? Edmure Tully will demand reparations, restitution for the villages burned." Jaime's mouth twisted. "We might agree to some lesser reparations, but let's not pretend the Tullys are free of blame. They sheltered Ned Stark, attacked our outriders. War is war." Ned's voice was measured. "If you want peace, you must redress the damage. The Tullys have lost too many crops, too many men. Your indemnity must include funds for them as well." Tywin exchanged a glance with Jaime, then nodded curtly. "We'll account for that. Now, about the matter of blame. I won't have House Lannister's name dragged through the mud. If you mean to put on some grand trial condemning us, I refuse." Robert's eyes narrowed. "A trial may be necessary for justice, but if you kneel publicly and accept the blame for the false succession, we might consider it enough. The small folk deserve to see that a crime was committed." Jaime bristled. "You would humiliate us, but let that red witch who defies your faith roam free?" Robert shot him a glare. "Melisandre hasn't plotted to steal my throne. She saved my life. That's more than I can say for your sister." A tense silence followed, pregnant with unspoken insults. Finally, Tywin said in a low voice, "Then let us see if we can strike a middle ground. No public humiliations, no formal trial, but an official record in the city that Joffrey is disinherited. He and Cersei go into permanent house arrest. The realm sees that you, Robert, are magnanimous in victory, and they remain alive but powerless." Ned and Renly exchanged glances. Robert's jaw worked as he considered. He despised the thought of letting Cersei walk free, but if it ended this war, perhaps it was worth it. "Swear your oath," Robert growled. "Swear fealty now on this meadow, in the sight of your men. Then I'll consider these terms." Tywin stiffened as if forced to swallow bile, but he nodded once. "Very well." They arranged a circle of watchers, each side forming a ring on the grass. Tywin Lannister removed his gloves, stepping forward. A hush fell as the Lion of House Lannister knelt before King Robert Baratheon, something unthinkable mere months ago. Tywin bowed his head, gold-threaded hair catching the sun. In a clear, crisp voice, he spoke words of fealty. "I, Tywin of House Lannister, do hereby proclaim my loyalty and fealty to Robert of House Baratheon, King of the Undulls and the First Men, rightful ruler of the Seven Kingdoms. May our houses live in peace henceforth." Robert's throat felt tight. He had once believed the Lannisters to be loyal, only to discover their deep treachery. Now, ironically, they knelt again. He placed a hand on the pommel of his sword, glancing around the ring of watchers. "Rise, Tywin Lannister," he said. "Your oath is taken. See you keep it, for if you break it, I shall not be merciful a second time." Tywin stood, expression neutral. "We have an agreement, then?" Robert shot a look at Ned, who nodded slightly. "We do," Robert replied. "We'll finalize the details in writing, but for now, yes. We end this war. You pay the crown and the Riverlands in gold, you accept my heir, and you keep your daughter and her son in house arrest. Joffrey is disinherited. Cersei's marriage to me is formally annulled. Peace is restored." Jaime's face was a mask of rage barely contained, but he held his tongue. Kevin Lannister exhaled a silent breath of relief. The watchers from both sides stirred with uncertain acceptance, half expecting some sudden betrayal. But none came. The two delegations parted ways to craft the official documents in each camp. By nightfall, they'd exchanged them under truce. That evening, Robert sat outside his tent, gazing at the starry sky. Ned joined him, plopping onto a makeshift stool. "I never thought I'd see Tywin kneel," Robert muttered. "But here we are." Ned nodded. "We can bring the realm a measure of stability at last." "You did well, Robert." Robert's thoughts flicked to Gendry, to the possibility of forging a better future for the lad. He said quietly, "We'll see if the Lannisters keep their word. But at least for now, the bloodshed stops." They both listened to the soft murmurs of men in the camp, the crackling of distant fires. War's end was never neat, but a door to peace, however uneasy, had opened. A week later, King Robert returned to King's Landing under more celebratory circumstances. Word preceded him that Tywin Lannister had yielded. The city roared with joy, culminating in a spontaneous festival in the streets. Marjorie Tyrell arranged a small welcoming ceremony, wreathing the city gate with fresh flowers. Confetti rained down as Robert and his men paraded through, battered but victorious. Ned Stark rode by his side, sharing a rare grin at the crowd's adulation. Not all were equally thrilled, of course. Some men in the City Watch remembered the old days of Lannister gold and realized those times were gone. Others worried about possible retribution from the West. But for the moment, King's Landing wore a face of triumph. The people were simply tired of war. At the Red Keep, Gendry emerged to greet his father, standing with Marjorie and a cluster of lords. He felt an odd mix of relief and nerves seeing Robert dismount. The king's eyes swept over the assembled onlookers until they landed on Gendry, and he smiled crookedly. "It's done," Robert announced, voice rumbling through the courtyard. "The Lannisters have bent the knee. Peace is ours." Cheers and applause rose. Gendry found himself grinning, some tension he hadn't realized he carried lifting from his shoulders. Marjorie caught his eye, her own smile bright. Peace, however, brought a new wave of challenges. In the days that followed, the Red Keep brimmed with negotiations. Messengers carried the final papers back and forth, arrangements for the Lannister indemnity, official disclaimers that Joffrey was not a true Baratheon, and instructions that Cersei be brought out of the dungeon and sent under guard to Casterly Rock. Tommen and Myrcella, still children, would remain wards of the crown until they reached majority. Robert did not want them entirely in Lannister hands, but they were not considered criminals. All the while, Melisandre and her growing cadre of Red Priests capitalized on the good fortune. They publicly praised R'hllor for guiding the king to victory. They held dusk ceremonies in the squares, lighting great pyres of scented wood, chanting invocations. Hundreds attended, curiosity turning into awe as the priests claimed R'hllor had championed King Robert's cause. The High Septon tried to protest, but the small folks' interest in the new faith swelled daily. Some septs saw dwindling attendance at the Seven's masses. Old tensions flared between the faith of the Seven and the new arrivals who worshipped flame. King Robert, for his part, had little interest in religious squabbles. But he could not ignore the Red Priests, especially with Melisandre gaining influence. One late afternoon, he summoned her to his private solar. Gendry, at Robert's request, sat in as well, quietly observing. Ned Stark was there too, watchful as ever. Melisandre appeared in her flowing crimson robes, her face calm. The ruby at her throat glowed faintly, as if it held embers within. She bowed. "Your Grace, you wished to see me." Robert waved her to a seat. "Aye, you've brought a swarm of new Red Priests into my city. They're converting my subjects in droves, or so it seems. Some folk are uneasy, particularly the High Septon and his faithful. Tell me, is your aim to overthrow the faith of the Seven entirely?" She smiled serenely. "The Lord of Light conquers hearts with truth, not by force. If the people see the glory of his flame, they come willingly. We cannot stifle their yearning." Ned folded his arms. "Your preachers say Robert is R'hllor's chosen champion, that the boar's tusks could not kill him because the Lord of Light had a plan. This talk stirs unrest." Melisandre's gaze flicked toward Gendry, then back to Robert. "The truth is often unsettling. You are living proof that R'hllor's power is real." Robert scowled, still uncomfortable with the memory of his resurrection. "I owe you my life, priestess, but I'm not your puppet. I won't proclaim myself a champion of R'hllor. I have no love for any priesthood." She inclined her head. "No one forces you to kneel, Your Grace, but do not be surprised if your people seek a new faith. The war's horrors, your near-miraculous survival, the victory over Lannister pride, these events cry out for divine meaning." Gendry spoke hesitantly. "But do you intend to claim the city for R'hllor alone? That could cause conflict." Melisandre met his gaze, eyes shining. "My young prince, truth cannot be contained. The flames spread. All we do is kindle them." Ned pressed. "And if the High Septon condemns these gatherings?" She lifted a delicate shoulder. "Then let him condemn them. Will the king crush his own people for following a faith that saved him?" Her voice carried a challenge, but it was couched in gentle reason. Robert exhaled. "I won't have a religious war in my city. I do not forbid the worship of R'hllor, but neither will I stand for violence between the faith and the Red Priests. Do you understand?" She bowed her head. "I do, Your Grace." An uneasy silence followed. Gendry watched the interplay, realizing how precarious the balance was. The new religion had caught fire among the people, and shutting it down by force might spark riots. Yet the old faith would not yield easily. Tension brewed, and the king would have to manage it carefully. Finally, Robert dismissed Melisandre, who swept from the room with a swirl of scarlet fabric. Ned frowned. "We'll need to watch them. This city can't endure more chaos." Robert grunted. "Aye, let the flames burn, so long as they don't burn the realm to ash." Time passed swiftly. The realm inched back from the brink of war. Lannister gold began to arrive in wagons, stored in the vaults beneath the Red Keep, thus refilling the crown's depleted coffers. Envoys from the Riverlands confirmed reparations being paid. Lords from across Westeros journeyed to the capital to reaffirm loyalty, curious about Gendry's new status. The city itself continued to transform with the presence of the Red Priests, who orchestrated more grand ceremonies in public squares. Some turned out to be charitable events, free bread, warm clothing, and blessings. Gendry found himself increasingly in the public eye. By decree, Robert named him Prince Gendry Baratheon, recognized heir to the Iron Throne, in an official document posted in major squares. The realm's shock at learning the king had a new, grown son was balanced by the relief that a stable succession might forestall future crises. Meanwhile, Margaery Tyrell's kindness in the city persisted, winning hearts. Many rumored that Robert might still wed Margaery, forging a powerful alliance and providing the realm with a new queen who could help guide Gendry. Others whispered Gendry himself might eventually marry a Tyrell daughter or some other highborn lady, though he seemed too young for that mantle of politics. With each passing day, the swirl of new possibilities gathered momentum. One morning, as the sun rose over a city bustling with renewed trade, Ned Stark escorted Gendry to the Great Hall. The massive doors stood open, revealing a broad floor lined with banners. At the far end, the Iron Throne loomed. Gendry had stood there before, an awkward guest at court sessions, but this day was different. Ned's voice was low and reassuring. "It's nothing elaborate, lad. The king simply wants to hold a brief ceremony to confirm your status in front of the assembled lords. After that, you'll be free to go. Think of it as formalizing what the realm already knows." Gendry swallowed. "I still feel I don't belong." Ned squeezed his shoulder. "You've proven otherwise, Gendry. Remember Flea Bottom. You work to help them. The small folk speak highly of you. Just stand tall." They walked down the length of the hall, Gendry's boots echoing on the polished floor. Dozens of nobles crowded the sides, lords from the Crownlands, Stormlands, and beyond. Margaery Tyrell stood with her father, smiling kindly at Gendry's approach. Red priests, some from Volantis, lingered near the back, their robes a sea of crimson. A handful of septons in the gallery watched stiffly, arms folded. Atop the raised dais, Robert Baratheon waited in front of the Iron Throne. His battered warhammer and crown were placed on a table, symbolic artifacts of his rule. Ser Barristan Selmy stood to one side, hand on his sword hilt. Another Kingsguard knight flanked the dais. As Gendry ascended the steps, Robert nodded gravely. The onlookers hushed. Robert cleared his throat, speaking in a resonant voice. "Lords and ladies of the realm, we gather this day to affirm before gods and men that my son, Gendry Baratheon, is heir to the Iron Throne. He was born of a lawful union in the storms of war, unknown to me for many years. Now, with proof established, I will see him recognized in the eyes of all." A murmuring wave passed through the hall. Gendry felt his heartbeat hammering, but he forced himself not to fidget. Robert motioned him forward. "Kneel, Gendry." Gendry obeyed, lowering himself onto one knee. Ned Stark stood behind him, a reassuring presence. Robert took up a short sword from the table, its blade gleaming in the torchlight. "In the name of the realm," Robert intoned, "I do dub thee Gendry Baratheon, rightful son of the king, crown prince of the Seven Kingdoms, rightful heir to the Iron Throne. Rise, Prince Gendry, and know that the blood of House Baratheon flows in your veins." He touched Gendry's shoulder with the flat of the blade, first on the left, then the right. Gendry exhaled shakily. "Thank you, father," he murmured. Robert set the sword aside and extended a hand. Gendry rose to his feet, meeting the king's gaze. Applause echoed from the lords in attendance, some genuine, some likely out of politeness or political necessity. Margaery beamed, clapping softly. The Red Priests nodded among themselves, whispering about prophecy and chosen blood. The septons in the gallery looked uneasy but did not protest openly. Cheers rippled in the hall. "Long live Prince Gendry, Baratheon, the king's heir." Robert turned to the throng. "Henceforth see him honored. He is my rightful successor. Any who contest this do so at their own peril." With that, the ceremony concluded. Gendry blinked, half-dazed at the swirl of color and noise. His chest fluttered with conflicting emotions: pride, uncertainty, a strange sense of acceptance. Ned congratulated him quietly, and Robert clasped Gendry's arm, murmuring, "It's official now, lad." After the ceremony, the great hall gradually emptied, the lords dispersing to feast or return to their lands. Gendry drifted off to the side, exchanging polite words with a few Stormland knights who swore to support him if ever he needed them. Marjorie Tyrell approached, offering her hand in a light gesture of courtesy. "Congratulations, Prince Gendry." He flushed at the new title. "Thank you, Lady Marjorie. I'm grateful for your help with the city's poor. I'd like to keep doing that if we can." Her eyes shone. "Of course, the war may be over, but hunger remains. We should continue distributing provisions and building better shelters." He nodded, feeling a stir of purpose. "I'll speak with the king about more funds." She leaned in, voice low. "You see, you're already acting like a prince. Keep trusting your instincts, Gendry. The realm will be better for it." A faint smile tugged at his lips. "You always say the right thing, my lady." She laughed softly. "It's a skill my grandmother taught me. Perhaps we'll speak more on it soon." Then she dipped a graceful curtsy and glided away to join her father. Gendry watched her go, momentarily struck by how effortlessly she navigated court life. Perhaps, in time, he would learn. Over the next fortnight, the city's mood brightened further. With the war concluded, trade ships once again crowded the harbor, bringing goods from Dorne, the Vale, and even the Free Cities. Inns bustled with travelers. Newly minted coin from the Lannister indemnity circulated, boosting the local economy. At the same time, the presence of Red priests became more prominent. Each dusk, braziers were lit at strategic points around the city. A handful of new shrines sprang up, featuring carved pillars of flame or rubies set in iron. Some small folk began wearing red ribbons or charms shaped like flames around their necks. When confronted by the Septons, they insisted Red priests offered warmth, charity, and hope. The faith of the Seven found itself on the defensive, scrambling to remind the population of the old traditions. Within the Red Keep, Melisandre held small gatherings in an unused courtyard. The bright fire of her braziers lured curious courtiers who wanted to see the famed Red Woman. She spoke of the Great Other, an ancient darkness that threatened the world, and Red as the only true source of light. She told stories of ice demons in the far north, a winter that could swallow the realm if men did not unite under the flame. Listeners gasped, half fearing she told bedtime fables, half suspecting a deeper truth. Gendry found himself invited to one of these gatherings. He was reluctant to attend, but Marjorie suggested it was wise for the Crown Prince to see all sides. So, one evening, Gendry arrived in the courtyard, escorted by a pair of gold cloaks. Flames danced in tall braziers, sending sparks swirling upward. A circle of watchers stood around Melisandre, enthralled by her measured chanting. She wore her usual red robe, the ruby at her throat flashing with each flicker of firelight. When she noticed Gendry's arrival, she paused her chant, addressing the group. "Behold the Prince of the Realm, living proof of Baratheon blood. A testament that the old line endures. Under Red watch, life can flourish again." The watchers turned, some bowing or murmuring Prince Gendry. He felt a ripple of discomfort but forced a polite nod. "Lady Melisandre," he said, "I thought I'd see your ceremony." Her eyes gleamed. "We welcome you. We speak tonight of the darkness that stirs beyond our sight. But fear not. Where the light is strongest, darkness recedes." Gendry shifted. "I don't know about any ancient darkness, but your priests do a lot of good in the city, feeding people, giving them clothes. If it helps, that's fine by me." She smiled cryptically. Practical words from a practical prince. Then her expression turned contemplative. "But in time, you may see that the war you just ended was only a prelude. Greater threats loom. We must kindle the flame in every heart, so that men are ready when the cold night falls." He frowned. "You speak of the others that roam beyond the wall? I've heard old tales, but no one's seen them in centuries." "Believe what you will, Prince," she answered smoothly. "One day, you may stand face to face with the truth, forced to defend the realm against horrors you never dreamed real." He had no answer. The watchers gazed at her in hushed awe. She resumed her chanting, arms raised to the braziers, calling upon Red flame. Gendry felt a prickle along his spine. Something about the swirl of heat and her fervent voice unsettled him. To a few minutes, he excused himself and left, half wishing he could dismiss her talk as nonsense, half wondering if this red woman saw more than the average soul. Meanwhile, the High Septon had not been idle. Disturbed by the rapid growth of R'hllor worship, he penned heated letters to lords across the realm, warning that a foreign fire cult threatened the tradition of the Seven. Some devout knights in the capital whispered that Robert's open tolerance of the Red Priests was a sign of apostasy. They urged the High Septon to call for the king to reaffirm his devotion to the Seven. When news of these letters reached Robert, he snorted in exasperation. I survived the boar's tusks, ended the war, and now the High Septon wants to lecture me on who I can let preach in my city? He tossed the parchment onto a table in the small council chamber, where Ned, Gendry, Renly, and a few others had gathered. Renly smirked. The faith is threatened by anything that might diminish their influence. This is hardly surprising. Ned, more sober, suggested caution. We don't want a faith uprising. The poor fellows or some zealot faction might cause violence in the streets if they believe you've turned from the Seven. Robert rubbed his temples. Damn it, I have turned from no one. I don't bend the knee to these Red Priests, but I won't stop them from giving bread to beggars. The city has had enough war. I won't force them out. Gendry spoke up quietly. Maybe we can hold a council of sorts, Father. Invite the High Septon and the Red Priests, have them talk. Show that they can coexist. Otherwise, we risk open conflict. Robert regarded him with a mix of pride and caution. A council of priests? The Seven and R'hllor in the same room might come to blows. But you might be onto something, lad. If we keep it under control, it could calm the tensions. Let them each spout their dogma. Then we decide how to keep the peace. Renly nodded. Better to try that than let the rumors of a religious war fester. So, by royal decree, Robert invited both the High Septon and Melisandre, as well as a handful of their followers, to a formal gathering in the Red Keep. The aim: a peaceful resolution to the friction between the faith of the Seven and the new wave of R'hllor worshippers. The date was set for a week hence. Robert secretly dreaded the event, seeing it as more squabbling among priests, but he recognized the necessity. Days later, the gathering took place in a vaulted audience chamber, smaller than the Great Hall but still large enough to hold a few hundred. The king sat at the head of a semicircular table, with Gendry at his right and Ned Stark at his left. Renly and Marjorie Tyrell watched from seats behind them. A line of gold cloaks formed a barrier along the walls, ready to intervene if tempers flared. On one side stood the High Septon, flanked by a cadre of septas and lesser septons. They wore the crystal icon of the Seven and whispered prayers for guidance. On the other side, Melisandre stood at the head of a group of Red Priests, robed in crimson, many from Essos. The air felt electric, as if two storm fronts had collided. Robert opened the discussion with a blunt statement. We are here to keep peace in King's Landing. The new R'hllor worshippers have grown in number. The faith of the Seven remains strong. I, for one, want no violence between you. So speak your peace. The High Septon cleared his throat, stepping forward. Your Grace, for centuries the faith of the Seven has guided the people of Westeros with the light of the Seven. We find ourselves troubled by a foreign creed that preaches of a single God and dismisses our holy mysteries as illusions. This threatens the unity of the realm. Melisandre inclined her head, her red hair gleaming in the torchlight. We do not threaten unity. We bring truth. The Lord of Light illuminates the darkness. The Seven are but facets of men's hopes, while R'hllor is the living flame. One of the Septons bristled. Blasphemy! Robert banged a fist on the table. No name-calling. We're here to talk, not fight. The High Septon pressed on. We've received many complaints that Red Priests are burning icons of the Seven in their braziers. Is this not an act of provocation? Melisandre's red eyes flickered. We do not force any to burn icons. Some new converts choose to relinquish old trinkets of false gods. It is their free will. That is sacrilege, another Septon shouted, prompting a stir of outraged murmurs on the faith's side. Melisandre lifted her hands. The flames purify. Are we to forbid the faithful their expression of devotion? Your own history has seen icons burned in times of schism. Chaos threatened to erupt, with septons shouting and red priests responding. Robert rose from his seat, the power of his presence silencing them. "Enough!" he roared, voice echoing. "We will not solve this by flinging accusations. This is my city, my realm. I allow freedom of worship. But if either side incites riots or commits violence, I'll come down hard." The High Septon, sweating, managed to bow. "We only seek to protect the realm's spiritual well-being, Your Grace." Melisandre spoke softly. "We too, Your Grace." Robert eyed them. "Then you'll keep the peace, or by the gods, you'll answer to me. I'll not have a new war of faith after we just ended a war of steel. Is that understood?" Both parties voiced grudging affirmatives. The tension in the chamber remained taut, but at least the worst accusations died on their tongues. After some more back and forth, they agreed to a framework. No forced conversions, no destruction of each other's places of worship, and no preaching violence. Robert had Ned draw up a short text for both sides to sign, an uneasy truce of religion. The High Septon's face was pinched with disapproval, while Melisandre's calm smile suggested she already considered this meeting a victory. As the gathering dispersed, Gendry quietly released a breath he didn't realize he'd been holding. Such tension over intangible beliefs felt alien to him, yet he saw how dangerously it could tear the realm apart. The city had avoided a riot for now. In the following weeks, King's Landing walked a fine line. The High Septon discreetly reminded the faithful to remain loyal to the Seven, while Melisandre and her fellow Red Priests continued to draw large crowds. The new worshippers lit candles at night, chanting in a language reminiscent of Valyrian. A portion of the small folk, enthralled by the dramatic ceremonies and charity, embraced R'hllor wholeheartedly. Others remained with the Seven or even worshipped both in some confused syncretism. King Robert, for his part, busied himself with affairs of state, forging new laws to rebuild war-torn areas. Ned Stark aided him while Gendry sat in on many sessions, learning the intricacies of governance. Margaery Tyrell's presence continued to be an asset. She coordinated with Gendry on relief efforts, and more lords favored a potential royal wedding that would bind House Baratheon and House Tyrell. Yet Robert seemed in no hurry to remarry. Perhaps he still felt the sting of Cersei's betrayal. Eventually, the day came for Joffrey and Cersei to be escorted out of the dungeons and sent under heavy guard to Casterly Rock. A formal nullification of the Baratheon-Lannister marriage had been signed, ending the illusions of Joffrey's legitimacy once and for all. The gold cloaks lined the route as a carriage bore them away, accompanied by a small band of Lannister soldiers. Crowds jeered, hurling rotten fruit at the carriage. Joffrey's shrill cries of indignation could be heard, while Cersei sat in stony silence. Robert did not attend in person, leaving the final supervision to Renly and Barristan Selmy. When word reached Robert that they had cleared the city gates, he exhaled in relief. "Let them brood in the west," he muttered to Ned in private. "Better that than sowing more discord here." Ned agreed, though he did not relish the idea of father and son parted in such a fashion. Yet the entire fiasco had been a poisonous lie from the start. With the Lannister threat all but neutralized and the city returning to a semblance of peace, Robert finally turned his attention to a matter that had quietly simmered in the background: Gendry's formal anointing as crown prince with the faith's blessings. Tradition demanded that the heir to the Iron Throne be presented in the Great September of Baelor, receiving the acknowledgement of the Seven. But with the Red Priests now in ascendancy, the question arose whether Gendry should also partake in some R'hllor rite. Robert initially scoffed at the notion, but the new realities made it more complicated. If Gendry was recognized solely by the Seven, R'hllor worshippers might feel snubbed. If he underwent a R'hllor ceremony, the Seven's faithful might rebel. Another religious flashpoint threatened. Late one evening, father and son sat in Robert's solar, a single candle flickering on the desk. Outside, the city lights glimmered. Gendry rubbed a hand across his face. "Can't we do this anointing quietly, without making a big show?" Robert shook his head. "The realm expects a formal demonstration that you are the rightful heir." A coronation of sorts, though I'm still the king. You're the crown prince, recognized by either the faith or by, well, some combination of faiths, perhaps. Damn these religious politics. Gendry shrugged. Why not do both? A brief ceremony in the Great September, then a short blessing by the Red Priests, with no set illusions about me favoring one or the other. Just acknowledging both exist. Robert stared at him. You might anger both sides. Gendry met his father's eyes. Let them be angry if they must. I won't pretend to worship gods I barely understand. But I can at least stand there and let them say a few words. Show the realm I'm not refusing either. A slow grin spread across Robert's face. That's quite cunning for a blacksmith's apprentice. Gendry gave a rueful half-smile. I've been learning from Marjorie and Lord Stark. They say compromise might keep the city from tearing itself apart. Robert chuckled. All right, lad. Let's do it that way. If the High Septon or Melisandre tries to cause a scene, I'll bark them down. Let the realm see we're not slaves to any single creed. Gendry's gut twisted with nerves, but he nodded. Then we'll proceed. On the appointed day, the Great September of Baelor stood arrayed in all its splendor. The morning sun gleamed on its marble domes, and lines of gold-robed septas guided visitors inside. The main floor filled with lords, ladies, and curious onlookers. A hush of anticipation pervaded. This was to be the moment the Crown Prince was presented to the realm in an official sept ceremony. King Robert arrived in a carriage with Gendry, Ned, and Renly. Outside the sept, the Red Priests led by Melisandre also gathered, their crimson attire striking a stark contrast to the faith's white and gold. At first, some septons bristled, but the presence of a large contingent of gold cloaks kept hostilities at bay. The plan was that Gendry would enter the sept, receive the High Septon's acknowledgement, then briefly emerge to be blessed by Melisandre. A delicate balancing act. Inside the sept, the space was illuminated by thousands of candles. Statues of the seven loomed, each draped in fresh flowers. The High Septon, a portly man wearing a crystal crown, stood at the altar. Robert guided Gendry down the aisle, the crowd parting in silent awe. Marjorie Tyrell watched from a side pew, giving Gendry an encouraging nod. At the altar, the High Septon lifted a golden chalice. A choir began a soft chant. Gendry's heart pounded as he knelt on the marble floor. The High Septon spoke solemnly. We gather beneath the eyes of the father, the mother, the warrior, the maiden, the smith, the crone, and the stranger, to witness the anointing of Gendry Baratheon, Crown Prince. May the seven guide and protect him, that he serve the realm with wisdom and strength. He dipped his fingers into the chalice, drawing out scented oil. Gendry felt it touch his brow, a cool drop. The High Septon recited a litany of blessings in formal High Valyrian. The choir's song rose, echoing among the sept's arches. Gendry inhaled, sensing the gaze of hundreds. Not long ago, he had hammered nails in a dingy smithy. Now he knelt in the capital's grandest temple, anointed as heir. The strangest part was how right it felt. The city, the realm, needed direction, and if he could be part of that, the High Septon's voice reverberated. May the light of the seven shine upon him, that he rule with justice and mercy. He gestured for Gendry to stand. Gendry rose, turning to face the congregation, who erupted into applause. Robert's face shone with pride, tears glimmering in the corners of his eyes. Ned Stark nodded approval. Marjorie wore a smile that warmed Gendry's heart. For a fleeting moment, all seemed at peace in that hallowed space. Then, according to plan, Gendry and Robert exited the sept, stepping into the midday light. The throng outside parted for them to pass. Melisandre stood near the steps, flanked by her priests, a brazier of coals glowing behind them. As Gendry approached, the Red Priests commenced a rhythmic chant in their strange tongue. Melisandre took a small torch and lit it from the coals, then gently waved the flame in the air. In the name of R'hllor, we bless Prince Gendry, who stands in the realm's grace by the Lord of Light's design, she proclaimed. May the flame guide him in the coming darkness. May he strike down shadows wherever they arise. She held the torch out. Gendry swallowed. Following the instructions given earlier, he placed his right hand near the flame, close enough to feel the heat but not to burn. Melisandre spoke more words in her accented voice, then gestured for him to withdraw. The watchers murmured, some in awe, some in disapproval. With that, the brief red ceremony concluded. Gendry turned to the crowd, an odd mixture of small folk, knights, priests of both faiths, and curious visitors from across the sea. Tension hung for a moment, but no outbreak of violence came. The gold cloaks kept order, and Margaery Tyrell, standing near the steps, clapped lightly, prompting others to follow suit. A wave of polite applause spread. Robert let out a sigh of relief. It was done. Gendry was anointed by the faith and acknowledged by lawless priests, forging a precarious but real peace. Perhaps, Robert mused, the realm truly could hold more than one faith. For so many years, Robert had disliked religious ceremony in any form, yet now it might serve as a buttress for stability. Gendry descended the steps, carefully ignoring the swirling gazes. People parted to let him pass, whispering, "The prince is chosen by the Seven, and by the Red God. He bears the Baratheon look. A new dawn for the realm." Margaery joined him, smiling. "Well done," she murmured. "You navigated that perfectly." He exhaled, remembering the forging of steel in a hot shop. "I'd rather hammer swords all day than do that again." She laughed softly, guiding him toward the waiting carriage. "Come, Prince. Today we celebrate." That evening, a modest feast took place in the Red Keep's great hall. Robert sat at the head of the table, with Gendry to his right and Margaery on Gendry's other side. Lords, knights, and even some of the city's wealthier merchants attended, all eager to witness the new state of the realm. Dishes of roasted boar, spiced wine, and honey cakes filled the tables, an echo of pre-war grandeur. At one point, Melisandre entered briefly, offering a simple bow to the king before departing, perhaps finding the rowdy feast ill-suited to her brand of piety. The High Septon did not attend, but sent a representative who toasted politely from a distance. Music drifted from a corner where minstrels played lutes and pipes, weaving a lively tune that set a more optimistic mood than King's Landing had known for years. Gendry found himself seated near Margaery, exchanging small conversation about the day's events. Every so often, a lord would approach, congratulating him on his anointing, asking about the realm's future. Gendry tried to give polite, measured answers, mindful of Margaery's lessons. If Margaery had taught him one thing, it was that each word at court carried weight, especially for a newly minted prince. Robert eventually rose to address the hall. "Lords and ladies, we gather in peace. The war is ended. The realm stands united. My son, Prince Gendry, is recognized and anointed. May the coming days bring prosperity. Fill your cups." A roar of approval went up, cups clinking. Gendry felt color bloom in his cheeks at the cheers. The minstrels launched into a bawdy tune about a stag chasing off a lion. Ned Stark, seated further down the table, offered Gendry a small, encouraging nod. It felt surreal, but also good, like a dream forged in the fires of adversity. As the feast wound down, Gendry slipped out into the Red Keep's upper corridors to catch a moment of quiet. The night sky shimmered with stars through a tall, arched window. He leaned on the stone ledge, letting the cool breeze brush his face. The events of the day, indeed, the entire transformation from nameless apprentice to crown prince, overwhelmed him. He breathed, slow and steady, recalling the forging of a sword. All heat and pressure hammered into shape. A gentle footstep alerted him to someone's approach. He turned and saw Margaery, stepping softly along the corridor. She paused, offering a warm smile. "I hope I'm not intruding. You looked as though you needed a moment away from the crowd." He shook his head. "It's fine. I just needed air." She moved closer to the window, gazing at the moonlit city below. "I can only imagine what you're feeling." Gendry exhaled, gazing over the rooftops. "A year ago, I was just a smith's helper. Now I'm all this." He gestured vaguely, his newly embroidered doublet glinting in the low torchlight. "I keep expecting to wake up back in that smithy." She placed a reassuring hand on his arm. "You have a good heart, Gendry. The people see that. They love a prince who remembers what it's like to be one of them." He met her eyes, a hint of gratitude stirring. "I hope so. Thank you for helping me see it. You and Ned, you made me realize I could do something besides swing a hammer." Marjorie's cheeks dimpled in a slight smile. "It's an honor to help shape a better future for the realm. You'll be a strong leader one day, in your own way." A comfortable silence stretched between them. Far below, the city glowed with torchlight and the flicker of Red Priest's braziers. Gendry thought of the new faith's rise, the continuing presence of the old faith, the realm's fragile peace. Conflict might yet spark again, but for now the world felt open and full of promise. Quietly, Marjorie asked, "What will you do next?" Gendry considered. "Learn more, I suppose. Ned's teaching me about law, taxes, alliances. I want to keep supporting the city's poor. And maybe if Father eventually marries again, or if I don't know, it's all swirling." She nodded gently, one step at a time. He glanced at her. "What about you?" Her expression grew thoughtful. "I do as my father wills, forging alliances, helping where I can. If the king wishes to marry me, I suspect that day may come. But I hold no illusions. In this realm, marriage is politics. For now, I'd rather remain free to do good in the city. The Tyrells can wait for a grand wedding." A wry grin touched Gendry's lips. "A wedding feast? I can't imagine Father wanting another big one. He hates ceremonies." Marjorie laughed softly. "Even so, the realm might demand it eventually. But let's not worry tonight." She turned to face the window once more. "Look at the city lights. So many souls, each with their own hope. If we can keep the realm at peace, maybe they'll flourish." Gendry followed her gaze. King's Landing sprawled below, a tapestry of flickering orange dots. He realized that for the first time he felt a sense of belonging, of duty. A year ago, the city had been a harsh mistress. Now it called him Crown Prince, and he felt oddly determined to serve it well. They stood there in companionable quiet, gazing at the starlit capital. In the days to come, the realm's metamorphosis became more apparent. Melisandre and her Red Priests maintained their presence, continuing to convert thousands to R'hllor. They argued the war's end and the king's survival were signs of R'hllor's favor. The High Septon and his faithful clung to tradition, performing grand masses to remind Westeros of the Seven's blessings. Tensions sometimes flared, but Robert's edicts kept the peace. The City Watch cracked down on any violence, punishing zealots from both sides. Across the realm, lords who once feared Lannister wrath bent the knee anew to House Baratheon. Tywin's gold wagons arrived regularly, paying off the heavy debts once left by Littlefinger's financial chicanery. The name Gendry Baratheon spread through taverns and hearths, stirring curiosity. A blacksmith's son who was truly the king's, discovered by chance, forging a new destiny. Ballads were composed, weaving truth and embellishment alike. Gendry divided his time between tutelage under Ned Stark, charitable works in Flea and occasional appearances at court. He wore the crowned stag sigil with a mixture of pride and humility, sometimes still shy about the regal trappings. Marjorie Tyrell continued her own philanthropic pursuits, often collaborating with Gendry, and in so doing, subtly guiding him in the ways of politics. One summer morning, Gendry visited the palace forge, where a royal armorer shaped plate for the gold cloaks. Gendry took a turn at the anvil, hammering out a new blade, letting the ring of steel fill his ears. Sweat trickled down his brow, the heat of the coals comforting in its familiarity. Around him, the armorer's apprentices gawked at the prince, but Gendry smiled and explained techniques to them, recalling his old life. Later, he returned to the courtyard, where Robert was sparring with Renly using blunted practice swords. The king, surprisingly nimble for his bulk, disarmed his younger brother with a swift blow. Renly laughed, rubbing his wrist. Age hasn't dulled your reflexes, Robert. Robert grinned, then saw Gendry approach. Come, lad, pick up a sword. Test your father's skill. Gendry hesitated, but Renly tossed him a practice blade. The two circled each other. Robert lunged with a savage overhead strike. Gendry blocked, feeling the sting reverberate down his arms. He swung wide, but Robert sidestepped, hooking Gendry's blade and pushing him back. Gendry fell to a knee, breath rasping. Robert let out a booming laugh. You've got power but no footwork, the king said, extending a hand to help Gendry up. We'll train you properly. A prince must know how to fight. Gendry took his father's hand, wincing. I can handle a smith's hammer better. Robert clapped his shoulder. No shame in that. You'll learn. The day may come when you defend the realm. I want you ready. Gendry nodded. I'll do my best. Ned Stark, standing at the sidelines, felt a poignant sense of gratitude witnessing the father and son forging a bond, something that once seemed impossible. The realm had been battered by deception, war, and shadow. Yet from that crucible, a new Baratheon line emerged, bridging old divides. Meanwhile, in quiet corners of the Red Keep, letters arrived from the north, speaking of unsettling happenings beyond the wall. Rumors of wildlings gathering in great numbers, talk of pale creatures in the night. Most courtiers dismissed these as tall tales, but Melisandre kept watch on the flames, reading portents. Sometimes Ned found her gazing into the brazier, lips moving in silent incantation. He asked her once what she saw. She only said, "A darkness on ice." Then she resumed her prayers, offering no further detail. In the wider realm, storms brewed across the sea. Whispers of new Targaryen claimants in Essos filtered into the city, though no one had proof. Robert grumbled at the mention of Mad King Spawn, but decided not to mount any immediate expedition. We have enough complexities here, he said to Ned, without chasing ghosts in Essos. Yet for now, the threat of Lannisters had receded, and the realm savored a fragile peace. The small folk welcomed simpler concerns like harvest yields and the flux of trade ships in the harbor. The Red Priests chanted their nightly liturgy, and the Seven's bells tolled at dawn. King Robert presided over feasts, hunts, and council meetings. Prince Gendry shadowed him, learning from each decision. Margaery Tyrell moved gracefully through the social tapestry, bridging gaps where she could. A month after Gendry's dual anointing, the city held a grand festival to commemorate the official end of hostilities, sponsored partly by Tywin's Gold. Elaborate floats paraded through the streets, depicting scenes from Robert's rebellion and the recent war. One float showed a stylized boar rearing, only to be repelled by a glowing red flame symbolizing R'hlloreth's intervention. Another showed King Robert and Prince Gendry forging swords together, a playful dramatization that drew cheers from the crowd. Robert watched from a balcony overlooking the main avenue, Gendry and Margaery at his side. Melisandre stood in the background, accompanied by a few priests. Even the High Septon was present, though he kept his distance from the Red Priests. Drummers and pipers played rousing tunes, the city swirling with banners and confetti. Gendry peered down at the spectacle, enthralled. He saw children waving little stag flags, wives clapping as costumed knights passed by. In one corner of the crowd, a group of Red Priest acolytes handed out candles to anyone who would take them. Just beside them, a band of septas offered blessings of the Seven. No fists flew, no curses rung out. It was an uneasy truce, but a truce nonetheless. "This is what peace looks like," Robert muttered, sounding half surprised. "I've known too many wars." Gendry nodded, a flutter in his chest. For all the city's chaos, this moment felt like a promise. Maybe the realm could endure with two faiths, with a reformed monarchy, with a blacksmith's son turned prince. He turned to Margaery, who watched the parade with shining eyes. She seemed to guess his thoughts and gently rested a hand on his arm. "It's wonderful," she said softly. He smiled and she returned it. The future, though uncertain, stretched before them like the broad horizon of the sea, vast, open, and waiting to be shaped. For now, at least they could celebrate this day of light.